Chapter 342. Xiao Xian still wanted to ask more, but Shi Shu was not willing to say more. You go, we still have things to do here. Moreover, our people are almost here. When the time comes, even if you use these insects, you won't be able to fight. Of course, if you want to know more, you can go to Rock Tomb City to find me. Xiao Xian quickly judged the situation and decided to withdraw first. Let's go, Xiao Xian said from the big beetle at his feet. The blue beetle immediately opened the way, and where it passed, the insect spontaneously separated. Seeing this situation, Shi Shu's eyes flashed thoughtfully. When Xiao Xian left the underground palace, he could not see Shi Shu. Xiao Xian let Sapphire take its insects to forage for food, while he himself rushed to the place where he had agreed with Lei and Ta. As for Shi Shu's words, Xiao Xian did not fully believe it, but he knew that it should be 3 parts true. After Xiao Xian left, the man in the cloak asked Shi Shu with concern, "Are you not afraid that he will tell our things to the slave owners in other cities?" "He won't," Shi Shu said. If Xiao Xian was smart enough and decided to not get involved, he certainly would not reveal more to others. Even if it was revealed, it didn't matter. At that time, the general trend was set. What if he participates? The cloak man was still not at ease. If he participates, cooperating with such a person may not be a bad thing. While talking, in a collapsed underground palace, a lizard with thick scales crawled out. It was not too big, but it was very flexible. It came to Shi Shu, opened its mouth, and spat out what it had swallowed. A dead man covered in lizard gastric juices appeared on the sand. It was the dead Daoyu. Unlike the appearance when he died, Daoyu at the moment seemed to have lost a lot of blood. Because of the wounds on his body, it was completely impossible to see his original appearance. Fortunately, although he was swallowed into the lizard's stomach, it was basically not digested. The flesh and bones were still there, but it looked shrunken. The man in the cloak saw Daoyu's current appearance and asked Shi Shu with some disgust, "Brother, he has become like this. Can he still be used?" Of course. Shi Shu looked at Daoyu's current appearance with satisfaction. When you're alive, you're not obedient. Then you can only use death. At the moment when Daoyu broke through the shackles, he was actually not far from death. It was just that Xiao Xian's appearance had brought forward his death. The person in the cloak was originally monitoring Daoyu. At that time, she was actually inside the underground palace, close to another exit, as far away as possible from a core seed. As for the giant beast that was following her, it buried its body in a sand dune somewhere outside. When Daoyu and Xiao Xian fought, she wanted to help. However, she noticed that Daoyu had broken through the shackles and did not go up to help. Instead, she ran out and summoned the giant beast to trample the underground palace. He wanted to kill Xiao Xian and then take away Daoyu's body. Unexpectedly, Xiao Xian was too strong, and there were also those insects. "I can't sense the core seed here." The cloaked man frowned. "The core seed must have been taken away by that kid," Shi Shu said. "Impossible. I didn't feel the core seed on him at all." The person in the cloak could not believe it, but seeing Shi Shu's determined look, she knew that the possibility was great. "Or should we send someone to kill that kid?" The cloak man said, "If there is no absolute certainty, at this time, it's better to take less risks. Those tribesmen, when they fight for their lives, will not care about anything. There are only a few people who can be tempted with benefits." Shi Shu said. Seeing that there were already a few birds flying over in the air, Shi Shu said, "I'll go back first. I believe that Snowfield City has already started a war with Huichio City." "Then do I have to stay in Baishu City to watch?" the person in the cloak asked. "No, you go and tell Su Luan that he can go to Baishu City." The person who came over by the bird wrapped Daoyu's body with a cloth, put it in a long wooden box, and then left with Shi Shu. As for Xiao Xian taking away the core seed, it was better to talk about it after the desert was finished. At the moment, they had no time to think about it. How much could a tribesman who had never been exposed to this kind of new thing think about it? Even those tribesmen who often came to the desert to rob, only robbed some ores, not the core seed that made these ores, because those tribesmen simply did not know that there was a core seed. Besides, if the core seed was not used properly, it was possible to exterminate the tribe. The tribesmen were so stupid. How could they think of the correct way to use the core seed? Thinking of this, the cloaked man was not worried and went in the direction of Loya City. Shu also put his main thoughts on the war in the desert. At this time, whether Rock Hill City's plan that had lasted for 3 generations could succeed, or whether Rock Hill City could unify the desert depended on this big storm. However, they did not know that Xiao Xian was not an ordinary tribesman. The use of the core seed, Xiao Xian had even guessed most of it. The rest only needed time to prove the guess. With the core seed, Xiao Xian rushed to the place where Lei and Tuo were. When Xiao Xian saw Lei and Tuo, the two were anxious. "Xian, I finally see you." Seeing that Xiao Xian was safe and sound, Lei and Tuo's hanging heart finally relaxed. These days, slaves have been entering the desert. "Xian, is there going to be a scuffle in the desert?" Tuo asked. "Well, it has happened. During this time, the slaves you saw entering the desert, what was each team like?" Xiao Xian asked the two to elaborate. Listening to the words of the two, Xiao Xian found that the slaves entering the desert this time, a small number were from other cities, and most of the others may be from Shu's people. Thinking of the buildings and increasing slaves he saw in the place where he met Yin Sha, maybe it was Shu who used it to raise soldiers. Xiao Xian only knew one place. He did not know about similar places. Maybe there were more. Without saying more, Xiao Xian took out a piece of cloth and took a charcoal pencil to write on it. Lei and Tuo had experienced a lot of such things. When they saw Xiao Xian began to write again, they spontaneously stood guard around. When Xiao Xian finished writing, he carefully put the cloth away and handed it to Lei and Tuo together with the animal skin bag with the core seed. "You leave now and leave the desert. The things in this animal skin bag are very important. Don't open it privately. You must take it to the tribe and give it to the shaman. Let the shaman see the content of the cloth first. Remember, look at the content of the cloth first. Don't open it before you see it. Moreover, don't let other people know about this, including the people of our tribe. As for what the shaman decides after seeing the content of the cloth, I don't care. If you can't take this thing back, then hide it first. If you can't hide it, then throw it away. Don't let people know you have this." Seeing Xiao Xian's serious face, Lei and Tuo carefully wrote down Xiao Xian's words. "Xian, you can rest assured that even if we die, we won't let other people know." But as they talked, the two always felt that something was wrong. "Hey, Xian, you won't leave with us?" The two just put down their hearts and hung high again. Xiao Xian shook his head. "You go first. I have something to do." "What else? Is it important?" Hearing Xiao Xian say that he will stay in the desert, the two were anxious. "Very important." "How important?" "It's about the survival of the tribe." Now the two couldn't say a word. After telling Lei and Tuo, Xiao Xian had to persuade Cha-Cha. This guy was angry. It was rare to persuade people and birds. Xiao Xian looked at the sky, took out a rope and divined. He raised his hand and pointed to a direction. "You go that way. It may be safer." "Xian, after we send the things back, if you haven't returned to the tribe, we will come to you." Tuo said. Xiao Xian still wanted to say something, but the two had already jumped on the eagle's back and flew into the sky. Looking at the eagle in the sky, leaving in the direction he pointed, Xiao Xian rested on a stone for a while and turned back to the depths of the desert. Chapter 343. He had to admit that Shu's words really made Xiao Xian think a lot. Therefore, this time, Xiao Xian also intended to take advantage of the chaos in the desert to find some useful information. After all, it was related to the survival of the tribe. Shu said that the tribe is going to decline. Yes, but also wrong. He was right. In a short time, there certainly would not be such an obvious change. It cannot be seen, so he could not be sure. He was wrong, but there were indeed legends that showed such signs. However, rumors were rumors after all. Xiao Xian could not know the truth. Ask the people of other tribes? Xiao Xian was sure that they would not tell the truth. Once again entering the depths of the desert, Xiao Xian planned to go to Liya City to see after learning that Shu had provoked the war. After all, he had cooperated with Su Gu. If he could bring a message in advance, Maybe he could make more preparations and suffer less. However, when Xiao Xian approached Luoya City, he found that Luoya City had already sent troops to Baishur City to start a war. The slaves lined up in neat rows, as well as the equipment on the slaves, did not seem to be a hasty behavior. It was more like they had been prepared for a long time. Such a fast response? Did they know that Dao Yu was dead? Did they know that Baishur City was at its most chaotic and weak time? Seeing this, Xiao Xian could not help but think more. Then, thinking of Su Luan's previous attitude, looking at Luoya City's quick response, Xiao Xian looked at the tall building in Luoya City and narrowed his eyes. Was Su Luan also a person on Shu's side? Or were these two people cooperating? If so, Xiao Xian did not have to worry much. No wonder when he heard that the desert was going to be chaotic, Su Luan remained calm and did not worry at all. In this case, Xiao Xian would not show up. After observing around Luoya City for a while, he left. Looking for a place where there was no one, Xiao Xian called Sapphire over. Sapphire had been following Xiao Xian all this while. It had a certain connection with Xiao Xian and could sense Xiao Xian's thoughts. Not long after, Xiao Xian saw the blue beetle emerge from the sand. Now, if the blue beetle stood on the ground, its back would reach Xiao Xian's knees. Its appetite was also huge, not to mention that it was carrying a swarm of insects. Therefore, Xiao Xian did not need to see it to know that there was a massacre under the sand. The other insects and small desert beasts hiding under the sand were lucky if they could escape. Those who couldn't could only be swept away. Looking around, Xiao Xian combined what he knew about the various cities. This place was a certain distance away from the other cities, and very few people would appear in this area. Little shit. Xiao Xian squatted down and looked at the beetle in front of him. Thinking back to when he was enslaved, this beetle was so small. Now, it had grown beyond his expectations. The blue beetle did not quite understand what Xiao Xian wanted to do. It was not until Xiao Xian stretched out his hand and blue flames appeared that it understood. It was so excited that it kicked its hind legs. It had not pushed a ball for a long time, but when it was excited, it could not help but kick its legs. This was a deep-rooted habit. Xiao Xian decided to unlock the second lock for Sapphire. In the past, he felt that there was not enough time. This insect needed enough space to adapt and grow. At the same time, there were too many variables. But now, Xiao Xian found that this insect adapted faster than other beasts. It was not long before it could lead so many beetles to eat meat instead of collectively pushing a ball of dung. Therefore, Xiao Xian decided to unlock another lock for it. If this guy developed well, it could also help him. Not long ago, Sapphire was leading a swarm of insects. After a while, would it develop into a larger-scale insect swarm? Thinking about it, Xiao Xian was still a little excited. He just did not know if it would go too far. Just as Xiao Xian was unlocking the second lock for Sapphire in a 2-story stone house in Rock Tomb City, Shu had taken Dao Yu's body back to the city and handed it over to an old man. Xiao Xian once asked Su Gu if there was such a person as a witch among the slave owners. Su Gu's answer was yes, but it was extremely rare. After all, once you became a witch, you could not be a slave owner. Moreover, the witches among the slave owners were different from the tribal witches. Most of them were direct descendants and could not enslave slaves. In Luoya City and many other cities, there are no witches. At this time, in front of Shu, the old man with a white whip and strange patterns painted on his body was a witch. His elders were also witches. They belonged to a special family in Rock Tomb City, no less than a small slave owner. The old man was busy dealing with Dao Yu's body. While he was busy, he was also amazed. Sure enough, a slave who broke through the shackles. This bone is hard. Very good, very good. If there were more slaves like this, it would be even better. Shu, who was sitting quietly on the side, suddenly said, "Witch, what do you say, how about I enslave a few insects?" The busy old man was pulling out the internal organs from Dao Yu's body, thinking about when to find more powerful slaves. When he suddenly heard Shu's words, he was so shocked that he almost shook the things in his hands. Nonsense! After saying that, the old man felt that his tone was too much. After all, The person in front of him was Shu, not his direct juniors and subordinates. He slowed down his tone and persuaded. Young master, how can you enslave such lowly things like insects? Ordinary beasts are already lowly, and those little insects are even more lowly. The old man looked excited, his spittle flying as he said a lot. His meaning was to let Shu choose some powerful slaves, such as those desert beasts, quicksand beasts, giant lizards, and so on. Or he could lure some tribesmen into the desert as slaves. If not, he could also choose something that could scare people. What were insects? That was the way to go. Only those who had no ability would play with insects. It must not be like this. If the old man was in front of his direct juniors or subordinates, at this time, he would probably start directly. But the one who said this was Shu, the young master. No matter how the old man opposed it, no matter how excited he was, he had to think more about his words. Fortunately, Shu still valued the old man very much. He could also listen to some of the old man's words. No matter what he thought in his heart, at least on the surface, he was still humble. Enslaving insects is not good, Shu asked. Very bad, the old man affirmed. Insects are the lowliest of lowly. Shu asked again. Yes, it's beneath the young master's status. The old man was very sincere. Really can't enslave? Shu did not give up. Young master, please reconsider. The old man threw the things in his hand into the container next to him. He did not bother to wipe his hands. He gave Shu a big salute and seriously persuaded Shu, hoping that the young master could throw away this bad idea. Shu looked at the old shaman who bowed in front of him. This person was good at everything and had enough ability. Otherwise, he would not be so valued by his grandfather, father, and himself. But he was a little too stubborn. Once he decided on something, he would not change his mind. He did not expect that just mentioning the insects would cause such a fierce reaction. Therefore, Shu did not say much. He sighed and said, "Forget it." He did not say anything about Xiaoxian's insects. It was useless to say it. Instead, it would make the old shaman say more and waste his breath. When the old shaman heard Shu's words, his hanging heart was put down. He had always disdained those little things that could be crushed with one finger, especially those without wisdom and were not smart. The old man, who thought that his persuasion was successful, straightened up and continued to work. He applied the medicine to the corpses that had been almost processed and then placed them in a room. When the medicine dried, he wrapped them in a cloth and placed them in a wooden coffin. Since Shu's grandfather's generation, he had been collecting the corpses of dead high-level slaves and making them into corpse slaves. This was a secret technique that several generations of shamans exhausted their efforts to explore and research. Now, in the underground palace where the corpse slaves were placed, there were already thousands of corpse slaves. Once the war broke out and reinforcements were urgently needed, these corpse slaves would be used. This was also a hidden card in Shu's hand that was not known to outsiders. By the way, young master, the tribesman you said had great potential. Will he really come? The old man asked. He will definitely come. Shu was very confident about this. If he doesn't come to me, who can he find? Shu, who thought that he had dug a hole and waited for people to jump in, did not expect that Xiaoxian did not intend to come directly to Rock Tomb City, but went to another city. Chapter 344. Xiaoxian was very wary of Shu. Such a person who could quietly provoke a war was too dangerous. From Shu's words, Xiaoxian felt that the decline of the tribe should be related to the slave owners. If you want to find the secrets of the slave owners, it was not only Rock Tomb City. In the 3 major cities, in addition to Rock Tomb City, there were 2 other cities. It was said that Snowfield City had already gone to war with Firehill City. He did not know how Shu had led the disaster to the east. In any case, the current Snowfield City was also quite chaotic. Since Shu had already started on Snowfield City, naturally, he would not let it be peaceful. Snowfield City was known by its name. The place where it was located was similar to the desert of Beast City, with more ice and snow in a year. When Xiaoxian came to the border of the area under the jurisdiction of Snowfield City, He saw a vast expanse of white snow and some red and purple flowers blooming on the snow. Probably, these plants were unique to Snowfield City. Compared with the desolate Beast City, there were indeed a lot of plants on the Snowfield side. Just now, a team of 200 people had hurried past. They should be going to the battlefield. Everyone's face was serious or sad. The successive wars had made them suffer heavy losses. Now, the king was like a madman. All day long, he looked like he was going to fight desperately. No one dared to refute the king's orders. If the king said to continue to fight, they had to continue to fight. Even the people of the three cities, who had been calm for a long time, suddenly came to war. Moreover, it was a large-scale, continuous battle. No one could bear it. When Xiao Xian came over, he saw a lot of bones. Some of them had been buried by the sand, and some of them were only partially buried. Many of the bones thrown there were eaten by scavengers, leaving only bones. It looked quite miserable. Xiao Xian collected some clothes of Snowfield City slaves along the way. The clothes of the lower slaves were not much different. After lurking around and observing for a few days, Xiao Xian saw an opportunity. When it was dark, he mixed into the end of a patrol team. The slave walking in front of Xiao Xian was already very sleepy. He did not notice that there was someone behind him. He just yawned and followed the person in front of him. The leader of the group didn't pay much attention to it. He was only on guard against the surroundings and didn't notice that there was an extra person in the group. Seeing the gate of Snowfield City approaching, Xiao Xian pulled the cloth hat on his head. In fact, it was a long piece of cloth wrapped around his head. This was a hat that was commonly worn by low-level slaves. Xiao Xian deliberately dirted his face to show his fatigue. He looked similar to the other slaves. The guard in front of the city gate glanced at the group and didn't notice anything wrong. Looking at Xiao Xian, who was yawning at the end of the group, the guard was glad that he didn't have to run around while guarding the city gate. Looking at the people patrolling outside, it was as if they didn't have enough sleep and didn't have any energy at all. It was already late, and they had all returned from patrolling. They were all busy going back to rest, and no one was in the mood to chat with others. The system here was not perfect. There were many loopholes, which made it convenient for Xiao Xian. After the team entered the city, Xiao Xian found a chance to slip into a sand house. The people walking in front of Xiao Xian and the patrol team seemed to notice something, but when they looked behind them, they didn't see anything unusual. They felt that they were probably too tired and confused, so they didn't care much. The sand house where Xiao Xian was located had no door. The people who lived inside had become cannon fodder in the war and had not returned. Xiao Xian temporarily settled down there, hiding and waiting for the right time. No one came in at night. As the night deepened, there were fewer people outside. There were no lights, and the moonlight was not as bright as the full moon, but it also cast a not too obvious black shadow under the houses. The continuous war made the people in the city tired. Except for the night patrols, everyone else went back to their houses to sleep. Compared with the former Snowfield City, it was now a lot more desolate. Xiao Xian came out of the sand house, avoiding the people patrolling the city and sneaking into the center of Snowfield City. The palace of Snowfield City was similar to that of Loya City. It was also very high profile, but it was much larger in scale. The guards near the palace were much stricter. Xiao Xian could not sneak in for the time being. He had to find an opportunity. Therefore, Xiao Xian first found a good hiding place and waited for the right time. The house where he hid was much more spacious than the previous sand houses. The materials of construction were mostly stone. The closer to the palace, the bigger the house was. This house was used to store wine. Xiao Xian saw a lot of wine jars. The wine here was not sold, but used as a reward. When the slaves made a contribution, they would be rewarded with wine. The slaves would come here to receive the reward. There were 3 people in charge of the wine house in the house, and they were already asleep at this time. Xiao Xian chose a place to store goods and hid inside. After looking at the furnishings and layout of the house, Xiao Xian guessed that there should be 5 people in charge here. 2 people were transferred out to join other teams, leaving only 3 people in the house, not only in charge of the wine house, but also in other similar places. Some people were transferred to patrol the city or guard the city gates. Some were even more miserable and were transferred to the foreign war team. The war consumed a lot of manpower and could only be made up by the slaves working in the city. These people were not skilled in their work. Even if they worked in the city, they did not suffer that much. How could they not complain? The consequence of slacking off was that there were more loopholes, giving people like Xiao Xian an opportunity to take advantage of. Those wine glasses looked like they had not been used for several days, indicating that the people who came to receive the reward had not appeared for several days. Thinking of the war in Snowfield City that he had heard before, Xiao Xian also understood that if they were defeated in succession, where would the reward come from? Even if there were people who made meritorious service, the slave owners would not be in the mood to reward them since they were defeated overall. Having been on the road, hiding, and guarding, Xiao Xian was also tired. It was rare to find a temporary place to settle down. He intended to take a good rest and replenish his seriously exhausted mental strength. Of course, even if he fell asleep, the necessary vigilance was also necessary. It was impossible to sleep deeply. He came to Snowfield City with the purpose of finding the history of Snowfield City. Loya City had a place dedicated to history. Su Gu had told Xiao Xian, as one of the 3 major cities, Snowfield should also have a similar place. Xiao Xian hoped to find more information from the history of Snowfield City to answer the doubts in his heart. If he could see the history, he might be able to explain Shu's words. Although the slave owners valued those historical records, the degree of importance was much lighter compared to the tribesmen. Even when recording, they would make changes, belittling others and promoting themselves. While Xiao Xian was resting in the high palace of Snowfield City, the Snowfield King once again flipped the table. The delicate wine glasses and tableware were scattered on the ground, and the wooden table that had just been made was also blown to pieces. Rock Hill City is too much of a bully. The Snowfield King's face was gloomy, his blue veins protruding. He had just received a letter from the Rock Hill City Lord, saying that he should stop and not let the war continue. I'm fighting with the people of Fire Hill. What does it have to do with them? They didn't say anything, but they also turned around and taught me a lesson? The Snowfield King was angry. No, maybe the people of Rock Hill City were also involved in the theft. Thinking of this, the Snowfield King was even more aggrieved. The core seed, that was the core seed, but it was lost. Thinking of his successive defeats, he trembled with anger. At first, he was angry with the tribesmen and wanted to kill the desert tribesmen. However, he got the news that the tribesmen had long slipped away. He then took back all his energy to deal with others. As for the tribesmen, those timid little minions could be dealt with later. The core seed must be in the hands of Fire Hill or Rock Hill City. The Snowfield King did not know that the timid little minions in his eyes had already taken the core seed and were spying on their history. Chapter 345. Xiao Xian hid in the wine house for 4 days. In these 4 days, he also learned a lot from the 3 slaves of the wine house. The 3 people who were close to the city lord palace and had a little bit of power naturally knew more than the lower slaves. Shortly after returning from the Beast City, Snowfield City went to war with the Fire Hill City. The slaves who were chasing the tribesmen were also called back to participate in the war, but the number of defeats was relatively high. Occasionally, when they were about to win, the people of Rock Hill City stepped in and reversed the situation. Snowfield City was once again defeated. In about 20 days, the number of people in Snowfield City had been reduced by more than a third. This was only a rough estimate. The specific number would only increase. However, for the slave owners, the lives of the slaves were not lives. If they were less, they could make up for it later. The important thing was to reverse the situation now. I heard that the king's lost things have still not been found. A slave lowered his voice. It is said that the people of the Fire Hill City stole it. Maybe there are people of Rock Hill City involved in this. Hey, when will this war stop? I don't want to go to war. The slave who had been silent sighed. If this continued, the 3 of them would be transferred. Now the situation was getting more and more serious. Defeat after defeat made the Snowfield King lose face. His anger soared every day. Because of the Snowfield King's anger, it was not known how many slaves were killed. Every day, slaves could be seen being carried out of the palace. Just then, someone came to look for them outside. The faces of the 3 slaves tightened, fearing that it was an order to let them participate in the war. However, when they came back in after a while, their expressions were much more relaxed. It turned out to be wine. Scare me. Tomorrow, send the rest of the wine to the palace. No, I have to drink it quickly. After sending it away, I won't be able to drink it. If I want to drink again, I don't know when I'll have to wait. The person who had just passed the message asked them to send the rest of the wine to the palace tomorrow. The king wanted to reward the palace guards with this wine. The palace guards are good. I heard that they can eat and drink a lot of good things. It's good, but recently, a lot of people have been killed by the king. There were also many guards who died because of anger, which made the guards more or less have some other thoughts in their hearts. The Snowfield king ordered the people in the wine house to send the rest of the wine to the palace in order to appease the guards' hearts. As the 3 of them drank and chatted, Xiao Xian, who was hiding in the utility room, also had an idea. He had been waiting for an opportunity all this time, and this time it was worth a try. If he missed it, who knew how long he would have to wait? Before nightfall, the 3 slaves put all the large and small jars of wine into 2 large wooden boxes. Because they had drunk some privately, several jars of wine were mixed with other things because the wine was not enough. Anyway, these wines were given to other slaves, so there was no need to pay much attention to them. After loading the wine, the 3 slaves went to sleep. Xiao Xian took advantage of the time when they were sleeping to add something to their room so that they could sleep more soundly. Fortunately, in order to sneak into Snowfield City, Xiao Xian had prepared a lot of desert medicinal plants along the way. When the 3 people fell asleep and made some movements, they did not respond at all. Xiao Xian went to the box of wine and took out the wine placed inside. He cut a wooden board of the utility room into a suitable size and put in the big box of wine. He felt that it was good. The wine jars were placed on the wooden board. Xiao Xian stood in the wooden box and then steadily lifted the wooden board with the wine. This thing was nothing to Xiao Xian. It was much lighter than the stones he used to lift. He slowly lowered his body and used his hands and feet to carefully hold the wooden board with the wine jars and slowly put it down. After hiding the wooden board and the wine jars, Xiao Xian moved his fingers. The sound of the silk thread flicking was heard, and the lid of the wooden box was accurately closed. Taking back the silk thread, Xiao Xian took a little rest and waited for tomorrow to come. The next day, the 3 slaves were still sleeping. Because of Xiao Xian's addition, the 3 people not only slept deeply, but also woke up later than usual. So when the people carrying the wine came, the 3 slaves in the wine house were still sleeping. Some of the slaves carrying the wine were palace guards. It was rare to hear that the king wanted to reward them with something. Naturally, they were very active and specially brought people to carry it. Seeing that the 3 people in the wine house were still sleeping, they kicked the door open and rudely woke the 3 people up. Regardless of the confused and absent-minded 3 people, they went directly to the place where the wine was stored. When they saw that the 2 big boxes had been packed, they were satisfied. They opened the lid and looked inside, complaining that there was not enough wine. They dug out all the wine hidden by the 3 people in the wine house and threw it all into the wooden box. When the wooden box was full, they held it by themselves. When the guards took the wooden box away, Xiao Xian could not see the expressions of the 3 people in the wine house. But when he thought about it, he knew that the 3 people must be cursing in their hearts. It was not easy to hide a little, but it was all taken away. Because it was the palace guards who carried the wine, the guards at the gate of the palace did not check it strictly. They also talked and laughed with the people who carried the wine, discussing when the wine would be distributed. The wooden box was carried to the cargo room. Although the slaves guarding it were eager, they also knew that the reward had to be arranged by the slave owners. If they privately divided it, they would be scolded. They only secretly took 2 small bottles of wine from the box and hid them in their clothes before leaving. When the people carrying the wine left, Xiao Xian listened to the movements outside. There was no one around, so he came out of the box. It was quite difficult to quietly come out from under the box piled with wine jars. Fortunately, Xiao Xian's strength was great and he was stable. If it was replaced by a weaker person with poor balance, it would be impossible. When he came out, a bottle almost fell to the ground. Xiao Xian quickly used his foot to cushion the fall and let the bottle land safely without making a big sound. Although it did not take much time to come out of the wooden box, the difficulty factor was high. After completing it, Xiao Xian was sweating. Putting the wooden board in an inconspicuous corner, he put the bottle back into the wooden box and closed the lid. Xiao Xian waited until there were no guards outside before he slipped out. The palace in Snowfield City was larger than the one in Loya City. Xiao Xian was not clear about the layout here. He just walked and hid, avoiding the patrolling slaves. For those places with layers of guards, Xiao Xian also temporarily avoided them. Those places should be where the slave owners were. Looking at the layout of the palace, there were basically only a few places that were heavily guarded. Other places were only guarded by a small number of slaves. They were also very loose, with low morale and no spirit. In the place with few guards, Xiao Xian looked for a small circle. He heard two young men and women whispering about the stone room where the notes were hidden. Xiao Xian quietly followed them. The two were not husband and wife, but they behaved intimately. They did not let the slaves follow them and went to the stone room where the notes were placed. Here, it should be a place similar to a bookstore. There were 3 slaves at the door of the stone room. 2 of them were relatively young, and the other was very old and blind. Second young master. The 3 people respectfully saluted. The man called the second young master waved his hand and pointed to the blind old man. You stay, the others go. The 3 slaves seemed to have known this would happen. They did not need the second young master to say more. The other 2 hurriedly left, leaving only the blind old slave to follow the man and woman into a room next to the stone room. Chapter 346. Not long after the 3 of them went in, Xiao Xian heard obscene sounds and the voice of the blind old slave reciting books. In many desert cities, some slave owners were not willing to look at the records left by their ancestors. They could not bear to memorize them, and they were told to treat them with care and not damage them. Over time, fewer and fewer people went to see the records of their ancestors. Later, a slave owner had a brainwave and arranged for his slaves to read the records. He also ordered them to memorize all the records they had read. Whenever he wanted to know something, the slaves who were responsible for memorizing it would skillfully recite it. Thus, there was a class of slaves who were responsible for memorizing. Their full responsibility was to memorize all the records for their masters. These people were like living records that the slave owners could take with them at any time. If they wanted to know something, they just had to ask. They could even beat and scold them at will. Listening to the sounds next door, Xiao Xian, who had sneaked into the stone room, thought, those 2 people are really in high spirits. They're messing around and listening to books at the same time. However, the old slave's voice did not fluctuate. It was very calm and was not affected by the 2 people. He was calmer than Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian did not know if it was because of his deep experience. Xiao Xian did not have time to think about the chaotic relationship between the slave owners. There were a lot of animal skin scrolls, wood scrolls, cloth scrolls, and so on in the stone room. This made Xiao Xian very excited. He finally found it. Looking at the classification above, there were also smelting-related books. Xiao Xian looked through them. These records were very old. Some of them were not well preserved. If he used a little more strength, he would have broken them. It recorded the core seed and where the ore for smelting came from. It was similar to what Xiao Xian thought. If the stone was placed around the core seed, it would change over time and become ore. The stone at different distances from the core seed would have different smelting methods because the metal obtained was different. The better the quality of the stone, the shorter the time needed and the higher the metal content. Xiao Xian looked through the smelting methods described in it. There were records of failure and success. Looking at these records, Xiao Xian felt that the ancestors of the slave owners seemed to have been exposed to smelting for a long time. It was not something they discovered and tried. In this regard, Xiao Xian had to find the origin of the slave owners, about their more ancient history. However, probably too long ago, Xiao Xian really could not find a place to put it. He looked through a lot and did not find what he wanted. At this time, the man and woman next door had finished their business and left, laughing. Xiao Xian put down the things in his hands and hid behind the stone shelf. The curtain at the door of the stone room was opened, and footsteps into the stone room. It wasn't light at all, and every step was rather slow. These were the footsteps of the blind old slave. Xiao Xian heard the sound of the old slave pouring water and seemed to think of something. The old slave sighed, then got up and walked over to where Xiao Xian was hiding. Outside the window, Yang Guang's light came in. Xiao Xian could see the other person's elongated shadow getting closer and closer. He silently took out the knife in his hand. When the other person was 5 meters away from himself, Xiao Xian suddenly got up and took 2 big steps. In an instant, he was in front of the blind old slave. The blade of the knife slashed at the old slave's throat. However, before he could cut, Xiao Xian stopped. Looking at the still calm old slave, Xiao Xian did not move the knife away. He carefully looked at the man. There was no one else outside the stone room. Inside the stone room, there was only Xiao Xian and the blind old slave. Something was wrong. Are you not afraid? Xiao Xian asked in a low voice. Why should I be afraid? The old slave's voice was gentle. Aren't you going to call for help? Xiao Xian asked again. Why should I call for help? The old slave's voice was still gentle. Xiao Xian looked at the man again. He was blind and did not seem to have the strength to fight. He was even a little sick and weak. How did you find me? Xiao Xian asked. Smell. There is the smell of fruit wine. The old slave pointed out seriously. This time, Xiao Xian was really surprised. In order to be more hidden, Xiao Xian had changed his clothes after sneaking into the palace. The smell of wine was very light. Even the guards could not detect it. But now it was actually smelled by the old slave. Seemingly aware of Xiao Xian's doubts, the old slave continued, I am already familiar with the smell here. As long as there is a slight change, I will be able to detect it. The old slave did not care about Xiao Xian's movements at all. He also dragged a stool and sat down leisurely. It looked like he was going to continue chatting with Xiao Xian. This made Xiao Xian wonder if the old slave had mistaken him for another slave owner in Snowfield City. However, the old slave's next words overturned Xiao Xian's guess. Why did you sneak into Snowfield City? The old slave asked, but did not get a reply from Xiao Xian. He said, at this time, sneaking into Snowfield City and coming to the place where the records are stored. Are you from another city? Without waiting for Xiao Xian to answer, the old slave shook his head and said, I don't think so. I can feel that you have just looked through the place. Are you interested in the slave owners? Most of the slave owners don't pay attention to the records of their ancestors. So, are you a tribesman? In the process, Xiao Xian did not answer a word, but the old slave said the answer in a gentle tone. No. In the end, the old slave's voice still had a hint of curiosity and interest without any fear or worry. Was this really a slave of Snowfield City? What do you want to know? Just ask me directly. You don't have to look through it. The blind old slave said, looking at Xiao Xian with a pair of strangely sunken, white and muddy eyes, waiting for Xiao Xian's words. Xiao Xian thought for a moment, temporarily retracting the knife in his hand, and asked, what is the relationship between the slave owner and the slave? If other people heard this, they would certainly despise him and say, nonsense, of course, it is the master-servant relationship. However, the blind old slave was not like this. Hearing Xiao Xian's question, the old slave thought for a moment and sighed. The slave owner and the slave. The slave owner enslaved the slave. It is like planting a seed that has no chance to germinate in the land under his jurisdiction, giving them a chance to grow. Later, the slave owner can also harvest the fruit. However, there's several barriers around the seed. If the barriers are not removed, even if the seed can successfully germinate, its growth will be limited. The slave owners remove the chains, which is like removing the barriers that block the growth of the plants so that they can continue to grow. When the slave owner dies, it is equivalent to no one taking care of these growing plants. The barriers are still the same. If you are lucky and a slave owner is willing to take over, the plant can be uprooted from the ground and then planted in the place under the jurisdiction of a new slave owner. The size of the plant will not change, and the extent to which it grows is still the same as before. However, There was always a problem with transplanting plants. If something went wrong during the transplanting process, such as the roots and other core areas being damaged, or if there were other abnormalities during the transplanting process, the plant would die before it could be replanted. Just as there is a certain mortality rate when a slave owner changes owners, if there is any mistake in the process of changing owners, the slave will die. Therefore, a slave changing owner is like transplanting. There's a risk in it. If you are unlucky, not only will you not have the chance to continue to grow, but you will also lose your life. As for breaking through the shackles, not every seed planted by the slave owner can break through the barriers by itself. Even if it breaks through smoothly, the situation of broken branches and leaves will appear. In serious cases, it will even affect the original power obtained. This is the same principle as slaves breaking through the shackles. In the earliest days, the slave owners would not easily remove the chains on the slaves unless they had been slaves for generations, and they were all loyal slaves. Only then would the slave owners remove the chains for them. But later, in order to compete, fight, and war, unlocking the chains became common. Xiao Xian listened to the old slave's answer. While writing down these words, he marveled at the old slave's knowledge. It seemed that this old slave really knew a lot. The blind old slave in front of him was just a low-level slave. In terms of strength, he was not even as good as other low-level slaves. At such an old age, he was also sick. Any low-level slave could kill him with his bare hands. However, such a person had memorized almost half of the records stored in the stone room. Moreover, after summarizing these things, he told Xiao Xian in more concise words. Overconfident, arrogant, not putting other people in his eyes, self-righteous. If he continues like this, he will eventually go to destruction. In the end, the old slave sighed. There are more and more rebellious slaves. The old slave even recited a copy of the Guilty Slave volume, which was written by the slave owners of Snowfield City. It listed the influential high-level slaves who had rebelled in Snowfield City in the past 1,000 years. The people who wrote it said that those high-level slaves were heinous, ungrateful, and unscrupulous. They got the ability from the slave owners, but they still chose to rebel. It was simply not enough for them to die. There was no doubt that every slave in the Guilty Slave volume died very miserably, but when the old slave said it, there was a sense of pity. Was it a pity that the slaves who betrayed the slave owners did not succeed? Or was it a pity for others? Xiao Xian did not know. Seeing that the old slave continued to feel pity for the slaves, Xiao Xian quickly pulled the topic back. How much do you know about the tribe's fire seed? Xiao Xian asked. Fire seed? It's really a nostalgic word. The old slave paused and seemed to recall a memory from a long time ago. I don't know much about this. I only know that the tribe's fire seed is getting weaker. You tribesmen seem to be looking for a solution. The old slave could not answer more questions about the fire seed. Xiao Xian was a little disappointed, but it was already very good that the old slave knew this. If the slave owners of Snowfield City can preserve the records left by their ancestors, maybe you can find the answer you want. Unfortunately, too much is destroyed. The old slave was very emotional. Xiao Xian's face changed. Could it be that he really wanted to go to Shu? Knowing that Shu had dug a pit there, he still wanted to jump in? Xiao Xian was really hesitant. Unable to get the question about the fire seed, Xiao Xian asked a question he had always wondered. Where do the slave owners come from? From the sea, the old slave said. Xiao Xian, do you think I'm an idiot? Chapter 347. From the sea? Xiao Xian could not imagine this, unless the slave owners were mermaids. However, this seemed impossible. Living in the desert for so many years, how could they be marine creatures? Even if they evolved, it would be a process. After hearing the blind old slave's answer, Xiao Xian's first reaction was that he did not believe it. His second reaction was that he still did not believe it. However, the other person's face was serious, which made Xiao Xian helpless. What does it mean to come from a sea? Xiao Xian asked. The blind old slave shook his head. I'm not very clear, but I heard some people say before that the slave owners came from there. Xiao Xian still had doubts about this. After thinking about it, he asked the old slave about the map of the desert. The map that Su Gu gave to Xiao Xian was not comprehensive. Xiao Xian hoped to see a more complete map here. After all, it was one of the 3 major cities. How could there not be a complete map? For maps, the old slave did not know much. He was blind in his early years. Many of the things that he memorized were only remembered after listening to others read them. Pictures and the like were more difficult. Although he did not remember, the old slave knew the approximate location where the map was placed. He went to the side of the stone shelf and raised his hand to mark a range. It should be in this area. You look for it. Although his eyes could not see, he clearly remembered what kind of notes were placed on which piece. Xiao Xian carefully rummaged and finally found a few animal skin rolls that looked like maps. This hasn't been touched for some years. You should be careful, the old slave said. It was indeed old enough. Even if the animal skin was carefully protected in the early stage and usually cared for, the quality of the animal skin was not excellent. With a little negligence, it could easily be damaged. The map drawn on the animal skin roll was very simple, and the scale was not good. It only marked the approximate location of the desert cities and some important places. Some of the areas painted dark on the side should be the sea. Xiao Xian memorized all of this, then put the map back. After flipping through a few more notes, Xiao Xian stopped. The blind old slave held some notes and put them in the place where Yang Guang was to dry them in the sun to prevent them from being eaten by insects or moldy. Although he could not see, it was not difficult to do such things for a long time. He could also feel where Yang Guang was. If you have nothing else to do, leave this place as soon as possible, the old slave said. Yes. Xiao Xian also did not intend to stay for a long time. Recently, there were more things in Snowfield City. Xiao Xian intended to leave later. Don't wait until sunset. After sunset, the defense in the palace will be stricter than during the day. The blind old slave said. Xiao Xian's face changed. He really intended to wait until sunset to act. He did not expect that the palace of Snowfield City would be like this. Could it be that the Snowfield King was often assassinated at night, so he strengthened the defense at night? No wonder the man and woman before came out to fool around during the day instead of at night. Good. Xiao Xian thanked the old slave and watched the old slave carefully move the notes made of different materials. Before listening to the old man's tone, he could hear that he did not have a good view of the slave owners. He even admired those historical traders. But for these notes left by the former slave owners, he cherished them very much. Thinking of this person's talent for reciting books, if it was in a more advanced, peaceful era, he might be a talent for learning. What a pity. How did you lose your sight? After Xiao Xian asked this sentence, he felt that it was impolite to ask this question. It was like exposing people's scars. Seeing that the old slave did not speak, Xiao Xian intended to change the topic. But he heard the old slave calmly say, "When I was very young, I became a slave of the previous Snowfield King with others. Once I looked at the notes in his hand. The king was in a bad mood and was very angry. I accepted the punishment." The old slave still remembered that at that time. After the king stabbed his eyes, he threw him to the side of the stone room and said, "Don't you like to watch? Then watch enough here." The blind slave could not see the words on the notes, but he begged others to read them to him. He wrote down all the notes he had heard and recited them every day. Xiao Xian heard the words and sighed again. What a pity. Before leaving, Xiao Xian also intended to leave some herbs. There were no herbs to strengthen the body, but there was still some left to treat trauma. The old slave refused. "You need it more," the old slave said. "You?" Xiao Xian looked at the sick old man. If he continued like this, not to mention the pain caused by the injuries, he would not be able to persist for long. Anyway, there's not much time left. The old slave was open-minded and waved his hand. "Let's go. By the way, you have to be careful of the bailuo." "What is a bailuo?" Xiao Xian asked. "It's a desert beast domesticated by Snowfield City. It's not big and usually hides in the palace. Their sense of smell is very keen. If you're not stared at by them, you will rarely be able to escape. The old slave said. After I sneaked into the palace, I did not encounter it. Xiao Xian said. The old slave was not clear about this. After all, his range of activities was limited to the stone room where the notes were placed. He heard other things from others. Maybe the Bai Luo stayed near the king's palace. The old slave said, but you still have to be careful. Well, I know. You can rest assured. Xiao Xian thanked him again and left the stone room. After Xiao Xian left, the old slave sat there quietly. Although he could not see, he could feel the direction of the window. At this time, he had been staring out of the window. His family had been slaves for generations. His ancestors had also become the king's guards. Until his generation, he was sent here early to guard this small stone room. He remembered an old man who used to read notes to him. Before he died, he told him that one day, the current system would be replaced by another system. During this time, he could not go out, but he could feel the changes in the palace of Snowfield City. He could speculate a lot of things based on other people's conversations. He also had an intuition that Snowfield City was in danger. He had just said to Xiao Xian that there is not much time left. He was not only talking about himself, but also alluding to Snowfield City. While the old slave was meditating, on the other side, Xiao Xian, who had left the stone room, quietly looked around. There were not many people around. Probably because there were no slave owners living nearby, he did not see anyone except for some routine patrols. Xiao Xian entered from the main entrance of the palace. As for the place to leave, he planned to escape from the back door or other side doors. The palace was surrounded by high and thick walls. There were people guarding inside and outside. Xiao Xian could not easily get out. He could only look at other side doors. Sneaking in, Xiao Xian suddenly had a sense of crisis of being watched. Was he exposed? He quickly looked around and fixed his eyes on one place. There was a tree there, and on one of its branches hung an oval object not much bigger than a fist. At this time, the oval thing on the branch was stretching out, the rolled-up body elongated, and the retracted wings spread out. The nose, which was almost as long as the rest of the body, unfolded and elongated, pointing straight at Xiao Xian's position. Bai Luo. Xiao Xian thought of the creatures mentioned by the blind old slave. If you're not stared at by them, you can rarely escape. This was the old slave's evaluation of Bai Luo. Xiao Xian did not waste any more time and ran away. He wanted to kill the Bai Luo first, but he had noticed that there were other similar sites around, indicating that there were many hidden Bai Luos nearby, and they were all focused on him. The Bai Luos in the palace were not all around the king's palace. Some of them found a quiet place to sleep. Unexpectedly, they met Xiao Xian and recognized that Xiao Xian was not a native of the city. Beep! A sharp whistle-like sound was emitted from the Bai Luo's long nose. This was like a signal, and the other Bai Luos around also made a sound and flew in the direction of Xiao Xian's escape. The guards around heard the sound and all gathered in the place where the Bai Luo was, shouting, "Someone is invading!" However, Xiao Xian's speed was also fast. He already knew where the nearest door was and went straight there. There were no other slave owners living around, and the king and the young masters raised several giant beasts around here. At this time, a Snowfield young master was watching the slaves helping him train the giant beasts. When he heard that someone was invading, and it seemed that there was only one person, he immediately became excited. This was an opportunity to make a contribution. Go and catch the intruder. The other slaves who followed felt bitter. Catching the intruder was the job of the guards. Why did you, a young master, have to get involved? But when a master went over, the slaves couldn't just stand by and watch. They could only grit their teeth and follow. Xiao Xian was like a sharp knife, splitting the encirclement in front of him. Listening to the movement behind him, he caught a glimpse of a large stone that was nearly as tall as a person. It was engraved with the words Beast Garden. Xiao Xian didn't care whether it was the Beast Garden or the Human Garden. He picked up the stone that was nearly as tall as a person, turned around, and threw it out. Because the young master was chasing with the giant beast, some guards didn't dare to get too close for fear of being accidentally injured by the giant beast. The rampaging giant beast roared as if it wanted to flatten everything. However, It didn't wait for long before a stone was thrown in its face. Its nose was hit hard, and it suddenly had a nosebleed. Its footsteps were a little staggered. Its feet were tripped by something, and its two front legs fell heavily to the ground. Its body continued to move forward and hit a row of houses. Boom! Boom! The houses here were not the reinforced walls of the Colosseum. Under the violent impact of the giant beast, they instantly fell down. Seeing this scene, the other slaves were full of disbelief. Unexpectedly, they directly threw such a big stone like a ball. Although there was no lack of strong people among the slaves, it was not so exaggerated. Compared with the person who just threw the stone at the giant beast, it was still a little worse. The young slave owner who fell from the giant beast didn't care about the injuries on his body. He shouted, "Tie that man up for me. I want him to be my slave." There were a lot of guards shooting arrows around, but Xiao Xian's speed was fast. Coupled with the chaos just now, he didn't wait for the guards and other places to come. He was already close to the back door of the palace. Chapter 348. Seeing the guards hurriedly close the back door, Xiao Xian didn't slow down. Instead, he sped up. If possible, Xiao Xian wanted to climb over the wall, but he couldn't. Not only was the wall high, exceeding Xiao Xian's jumping range, it was also very smooth. It was deliberate. He could use other tools to climb over, but that would slow him down. Once he slowed down, Xiao Xian would be in danger of being shot into a sieve. Since he couldn't climb over the wall, he could only use brute force. Fortunately, there was only one door. Seeing the figure rushing towards the back door, the guards at the back door couldn't help but feel nervous. They couldn't see what the person looked like because he was too fast. Their eyes couldn't keep up with him. They only felt that he was only one person, not a giant. But he gave them a sense of crisis and oppression, as if they were facing a giant beast. This wasn't the Colosseum, and there was only one person. There was no need to worry, no need to be afraid, it would be fine. As long as the kid came over, everyone would work together to cut him down. If the guy chose to climb over the wall, the guards on the other side of the door had already prepared their bows and arrows. They were all pointing at the top of the wall. As long as the guy climbed over, they would shoot. He was getting closer and closer. The guards' faces twitched due to excessive nervousness. Their eyes were fixed on the figure rushing over, and they roared in their hearts, "Impossible." The guy actually chose to go head-on. There were actually two doors at the back door. When they heard the commotion just now, they closed one door and didn't close the other because they felt that it was unnecessary. One stone door was enough to stop the intruder. However, at this moment, they suddenly felt uncertain. It was too late to close the second door. As Xiao Xian rushed to the back door, he also crazily mobilized the totemic power in his body. Even after reaching the limit, he still didn't stop. The accumulated power was squeezed again and again. The surging totemic power rushed to every part of his body, but couldn't find a place to vent. It was like a volcano that was about to erupt, but was forcibly sealed. The magma in the mountain was constantly accumulating, waiting to erupt. Xiao Xian's aura also skyrocketed because of the unceasing accumulation of power and the surging blood in his body. The closer he got to the back door of the palace, the more obvious the cracks on the stone slabs on the ground became. The crunching sound were like gears moving forward. The guards who were still guarding the door saw this scene and couldn't help but move to the side. They didn't dare to resist. At the moment of explosion, the moment he exploded, he suddenly let out a long howl. Xiao Xian. He shot straight towards the closed door in front of him like a cannonball and threw a fierce punch. Boom! The ground seemed to vibrate. Ants. Was? And the person who had made S's success had already rushed us. The guards by the door turned their necks mechanically and stared at the hole that had just been forcefully opened. They felt that this hole was like the bloody mouth of a giant beast. It was terrifying, and the person who had opened this hole was even worse than the giant beast. Too terrible. One of the guards hurriedly wiped away the sweat on his forehead as he recalled the power of the collision with the palace gate. The sound of the collision seemed to be reverberating in his ears. It was as if his soul was about to be shaken by the impact. Outside the palace, The row of people who were staring at the wall with their bows and arrows were also stunned by this sudden scene. A moment ago, they were still staring at the wall, and the next moment, they heard a sound that almost made their hearts jump out of their throats, accompanied by a burst of stones that were spurting out. Then, they only felt a blur in front of their eyes. An elusive figure flashed, and everything was over. Not only the guards at the back door, but at this time, some people were lurking outside the palace, hiding near some of the houses closer to the palace, observing the palace's movements. They were not the people of Snowfield City. When they heard the movement in the palace before, they were still wondering what had happened inside. They wondered if their accomplices who had sneaked into the palace had been discovered in advance. Before they came, they were also told by the young master how to avoid Bai Luo. If they failed again, they really did not dare to go back to see the young master. If they failed, they could only give up this mission. However, they did not expect that they would see someone break through the back door of the palace. The people who stared over there were all shocked. Unexpectedly, the back door of the Snowfield Palace was broken. Where the hell did this barbarian come from? At this time, the Snowfield King was in the palace. Listening to the messy sounds coming from his ears, the Snowfield King, who wanted to take a rest, was now not sleepy. Enduring his anger, he listened to the report of his subordinates. The expression on his face became more and more terrifying. In the huge hall, there was a dignified sense of oppression. Everyone did not dare to breathe. The people of Snowfield City were relatively white among the desert cities. But at this time, the Snowfield King, because of several defeats, being provoked again and again, and hearing about the disturbance and the intruder who had successfully sneaked in and broke out, was so angry that his face was red and his blue veins were about to jump out. After the slave who reported to him finished, he stood there trembling, waiting for the king's instructions. So many people, yet they couldn't catch a small intruder. The Snowfield King gritted his teeth, almost growling. Xiao Xian, who did not know that the Snowfield King had issued a kill order, was now only aiming to leave the city. Many people in the city only heard the movement on the side of the palace, but because this kind of thing often happened since the beginning of the war, they were curious and no longer paid attention to it. Naturally, the palace guards were busy on the side of the palace, so they did not care. Many people only saw a flash of a figure and did not see who was running in the end. Even if they went forward to stop him, they could not stop him. Either their speed could not keep up, or their strength could not win. As soon as they went up, they were hit. Xiao Xian ran, breaking through the obstacles in front of him. At this time, the city gate was not closed. It was now dusk, and other people who went out to patrol would come back one after another. No one let them close the city gate. Several guards were still talking about whether there was another assassination on the side of the palace. Suddenly, they heard a whoosh like a gust of wind sweeping past. The speed of the person running past was like a hurricane. The wind and waves that were brought up rolled up a layer of snow on the sand, like scattering flowers behind the running person. What's going on? Just now, it seems that someone ran past. They wanted to chase, but looking at the momentum, they certainly could not catch up, so they simply did not chase. Could it be the assassin on the side of the palace? Then should we close the city gate? What's the use of closing it now? They all ran away. But if there are other assassins, won't they all be let go? The people at the city gate discussed. Finally, the leader decided to close the gate first. If there were people patrolling outside, they would open it again. However, when they closed the gate halfway, they heard the sound of footsteps. When they looked over, they were almost scared to death. Jinjiawi, it's the Jinjiawi. Hurry up, open the city gate. The leader hurriedly opened the half-closed gate again. 200 Jinjiawi, a pair of indifferent and emotionless eyes, looked straight ahead, ruthlessly strangling the people who obstructed their progress, even if these people were the people of Snowfield City. The collision of the metal and the tearing of the flesh, with a cruel and bloody aura, rushed straight forward like a meat grinder, making the slaves in Snowfield City tremble in fear and tremble. The timid ones hid in the corner of the house, as if they were thinking of some fearful memories. They covered their ears, tried to resist the sounds outside. The bolder ones listened to the sound of blood spraying and the stabbing of spears, guessing how many people outside did not have time to escape and were directly strangled. Chapter 349. After Xiao Xian escaped from Snowfield City, he recalled the maps he had seen in the stone room before. He did not plan to go to several cities in the desert. Now, no city was peaceful. Besides, for the tribesmen, those slave owners had never had a good attitude. Even Su Luan had other purposes. Therefore, Xiao Xian's route now did not have any contact with the city under the control of any slave owner. He wanted to stay as far away from those troubles as possible. Originally, Xiao Xian also wanted to go to the seaside. The planned route would lead to the sea closest to Snowfield City. However, when Xiao Xian noticed the people behind him, he could only put down other thoughts and escape. There were 200 Jinjiawi. If Xiao Xian wanted to deal with them, he could break them one by one. However, this group of Jinjiawi almost never acted separately. They probably knew their own shortcomings. The Jinjiawi came out as a complete whole, which made Xiao Xian unable to find the right time to start. Moreover, Xiao Xian could feel that those Jinjiawi were like death soldiers. They seemed to know no fear and kept chasing until the task was completed. If there was a way to deal with those by Luo, Xiao Xian would not have been chased by the pursuers. However, those by Luo were very smart. They never left the Jinjiawi. When they found something unusual, they would drill into the Jinjiawi team and hide. It was difficult, really difficult. Since entering the desert, Xiao Xian was chased for the first time in such a difficult situation. He escaped quickly, but those by Luo could always find him accurately. No matter if he used clothes to make dummies or applied other scents to his body, he could not get rid of the Bai Luo. No wonder the blind old slave said that once you were targeted by the Bai Luo, it would be difficult to escape. Xiao Xian couldn't think of a good solution at the moment. He could only use his advantage in speed to alleviate the current predicament. He thought that if he took this group of people to other cities, he would let them kill each other. But before Xiao Xian could lead them there, he encountered two groups of people from Shaki City and Skywheel City fighting each other. Contrary to Xiao Xian's expectations, when the three groups met, they did not continue to fight each other. Instead, the three groups joined forces to chase after Xiao Xian. This gave Xiao Xian an even bigger headache. The two teams that had been fighting energetically followed the Golden Armor Guards and gave chase. They felt that since Snowfield City could send the Jinjiawi to kill a person, that person must be very special. How special? For example, stealing some good things from Snowfield City? Everyone wanted to fish for benefits. The people of Shaki City and Skywheel City did not care about fighting with each other. They wanted to catch the person who might have the treasure before the other side, and then go back to the city to receive the reward from the king. With such a thing, Xiao Xian did not expect them to fight each other. He could only think about how to get out of this predicament. He had long left the jurisdiction of Snowfield City. There was no snow, and the temperature in the surrounding desert was very high. Xiao Xian stepped on the hot sand under his feet and came to the shadow of the sand dune to take a break. There was not much time left for him to rest. Rustle. The sand on the sand dune slid down. Xiao Xian looked at it vigilantly. He had been hiding his breath very well. Even when he was resting, he did not make any big movements. However, for some of the beasts in the desert, Xiao Xian could not detect them every time. These beasts hid very well under the sand. In the process of Xiao Xian running all the way, he almost stepped on the snakes and scorpions that buried their bodies in the sand. The difference was that at this time, what climbed out of the sand dune was not a small beast, but a giant beast. Xiao Xian had already retreated the moment he saw the movement there. Puff! The giant beast snorted and two sand arrows were ejected from the giant beast's nostrils, piercing into the sand not far away. Looking at the figure of the giant beast, Xiao Xian had a sense of familiarity. The giant beast, which had just been sleeping in the sand dune, noticed that someone was there. It immediately let out a dissatisfied scream, like the wind blowing sand. However, when it saw Xiao Xian's appearance, the roar came to an abrupt end. The horned lizard beast that was stuck in the middle of roaring Xiao Xian If it were not for the current situation, Xian really wanted to say hello to this. Yo, long time no see. This giant beast was the horned lizard beast that he had seen in the Colosseum. However, at this time, there were no traces of red around its eyes. It was probably washed away by the sand. When the Colosseum was chaotic, many ownerless giant beasts ran away. Among them was the horned lizard beast that Xian confronted in the Colosseum. However, Xian did not expect to meet it here. Xian was also worried about this horned lizard beast's revenge. However, the horned lizard beast was more worried than Xian. At that time, the feeling of fear in the Colosseum was still clear in its mind. These giant beasts did not mainly remember people by looking at their appearance, but also their breath and the power fluctuations around their body. One man and one beast were in a deadlock, guarding against each other until a blue beetle drilled out of the ground, breaking the frozen atmosphere at this moment. The horned lizard beast turned and ran away. Xian, who was relieved, turned his attention to Sapphire. From the beginning of the successful enslavement, the beetle's carapace was as bright as a gem even when it pushed a dung ball. However, now, it was more embarrassed than Xian. He did not know what it encountered under the sand. Its carapace was deeply concave. If it was deeper, it would be life-threatening. Even if the current injury was not life-threatening for the time being, for this beetle, the injury was very serious. Its wings were damaged, and it could no longer fly. Although they spent most of their time on the ground or under the sand, they could still fly to avoid disaster when they encountered a critical situation. But now, if this beetle encountered another desert beast, it didn't need to be that big. A slightly more ferocious beast could pose a great threat to it. Xian knew that Sapphire carried a lot of beetles, but the other beetles could not keep up with its speed and fell far behind. Xian did not know the scale of Sapphire's insect army, but he could be sure that if it was the same size as before, it could not stop the 200 Jinjiawi and the 2 teams from the other 2 cities. There was no hope. Carefully looking at the injuries on Sapphire's body, Xian did not know what to do. If it was an animal such as a wolf or a lion, he could still know some ways to deal with it. However, he had no way to deal with the insect's injuries. What about your injuries? Xian looked at the injury on Sapphire's back and sighed. Sapphire scratched the ground and crawled to Xian. It did not know how to express itself, so it could only circle Xian. Fortunately, Xian could feel its thoughts. Unlock it again? Xian was not at ease. How long had it been since the second lock was unlocked? If he unlocked the third lock now, would it be able to take it? If it could not control the power in its body, it would die. However, looking at Sapphire's injuries and its cautious and eager look, Xian decided to fulfill its wish. If its injuries could heal after unlocking the third lock, it would be worth it. Such injuries, just like when Caesar was heavily injured, Xian had engraved Caesar and healed Caesar's injuries. Perhaps unlocking it would have the same effect. However, it was also very risky. If he was not careful, he would die. Blue flames emerged from his hands. Xian tried his best to concentrate and control the power of unlocking. Looking at the excited blue beetle, Xian thought to himself, I can only wish you good luck. Chapter 350. After the third lock was successfully unlocked, whether Sapphire could survive or not depended on itself. Originally, Xian thought he could get the result in a short time. However, after the third lock was unlocked, Sapphire seemed to be asleep. It did not respond to the outside world and was in a state similar to dormancy. Xian was not at ease and planned to wait, but he had already heard the movements of the Jinjiawi. Xian admired the persistence of the Jinjiawi who were chasing after them. This was already the 10th day. In addition to looking for food and a short rest, the Jinjiawi spent the rest of their time chasing. Not only the Jinjiawi, but even the Jinjiawis riding beasts that looked like camels and horses also had excellent endurance. They could withstand the cold and heat and could run for a long time. As for the people of Shaki City and Skywheel City, who were originally following closely behind the Jinjiawi, They were getting further and further away. Seeing that Sapphire still did not move, Xiao Xian could not carry it and run. After all, the people and beasts behind him were chasing after him, not the beetle. Xiao Xian lifted Sapphire and put on a sand dune. The surrounding sand moved towards Sapphire and hit it. The target of the Bai Luo was Xiao Xian. As for other things besides Xiao Xian, they did not care and ignored them all. The team chased after Xiao Xian, bringing a burst of sand and dust. The Bai Luo made a sharp beep sound, flapping its wings and pointing its long nose at Xiao Xian. When the dust dissipated, the place was restored to its original state. The fierce wind blew the sand on the sand, dune to other places. Soon, there were no traces of human activity. Xiao Xian felt that he had found a dead end for himself. Escaping to the left was the jurisdiction of Shaki City. Running to the right was the area of Skywheel City. Around here, he could already see some of the Skywheel pillars that were not growing very well. Xiao Xian didn't know why he had run in this direction. When he came back to his senses, he realized that he had foolishly put himself in a dead end. He clearly knew that he shouldn't be careless when he was running for his life. The desert was so big that even if he led the Jinjios behind him to take a detour, he could still find an opportunity to run back and break through this situation. However, as soon as he started running, Xiao Xian felt that his consciousness was out of control, and he directly ran forward. There were birds flying in the sky. They were not wild birds in the desert, but birds domesticated by the people of Skywheel City. There are also people on the back of the birds. Although Skywheel City did not launch a fierce large-scale war with other cities and only had some small friction with Sanchi City, it was also affected by the tense situation in the desert. Every day, there would be a patrol team going out to investigate. Now, Xiao Xian encountered a patrol team from Skywheel City. On the right, there was a patrol team from Skywheel City lying in ambush. Behind him, there were Jinjios chasing after him. And in front of him, there was a cliff by the sea. It was reasonable to say that normal people should run to the left at this time, but Xiao Xian ran straight forward. In the eyes of others, he was really like a madman who was courting death. At this moment, Xiao Xian felt that his legs were not his own. He couldn't control them and rushed straight forward. His mind couldn't think of anything else until the moment he jumped. Xiao Xian suddenly woke up. Unfortunately, he had already jumped. F***CK. Falling from a high place, he fell into the blue sea and sank. Xiao Xian felt as if someone was dragging him down, and he was falling. Compared to the desert outside, the surrounding seawater was much colder. From the scorching desert to the sudden contact with seawater, and the deeper he sank, the lower the temperature became. The difference in temperature made Xiao Xian shiver uncontrollably. Originally, he planned to go upstream, but found that it had little effect. The water around him was flowing. This kind of water flow made Xiao Xian's scalp tingle. He was too clear about what this water flow meant. He held his breath and stopped the movements of his hands, not daring to move. The huge figure came closer from afar. The light above the sea allowed Xiao Xian to see the stripes on its body, as well as the fangs exposed from its huge mouth. Xiao Xian couldn't even compare to the other side's teeth. There were no claws, but the fin-like limbs did not reduce the power of this giant beast. Being stared at by those eyes, the timid soul probably flew away. The other side seemed to be uninterested in Xiao Xian, such a small person. It just swam around and did not leave. What made Xiao Xian even more desperate was that after he stopped paddling, the speed of his descent became faster. Even if his ability to hold his breath was good, it was impossible to hold in the sea forever. If this continues, he won't be able to leave alive. At this time, outside the sea, on the cliff, the golden armor guards who had chased after them gathered at the edge of the cliff. They looked at the endless blue sea and did not jump down. They were not stupid, so how could they follow them down to their deaths? The riding beasts seemed to feel the pressure under the sea and uneasily stomped their hooves. After appeasing the riding beasts, the leader of the Jinjiawi led everyone to separate and watch Xiao Xian. Once he appeared, they would shoot him, not far away. The people of Skywheel City were stunned by Xiao Xian's actions. Someone actually went straight to the cliff and jumped down from it. Was this looking for death, or was it looking for death? The giant beast in the sea seemed to be aware of the many people on the cliff. It was very unhappy about this. It rushed out of the water and turned over. With a roar, the rocks on the cliff collapsed. Even if the Jinjiawi were not afraid of death, they could not help but retreat a few steps with their riding beasts. The people of Skywheel City who were not far away were even more straightforward and directly retreated 100 meters. Living in this place, they knew very well what was below. It was an unshakable creature, far from the giant beasts in the desert. The Jinjiawi, who had been ordered by the king to die, wandered on the edge of the cliff for 2 days. They did not see Xiao Xian again, so they inferred that Xiao Xian should have been swallowed by the giant beast in the sea. This was also an indirect completion of the king's order, right? On the 3rd day, the leader of the Jinjiawi waved his hand. Go back. The task was completed, so naturally it was time to go back. As for the people of Skywheel City who were lying in ambush, they wanted to rob the equipment of the Jinjiawi. Unfortunately, in the end, they did not have the courage. They hesitated and saw that the Jinjiawi had gone away. Forget it. Let's wait for another chance next time. A man from Skywheel City said. Their patrol team did not have enough people. The number of people was not much more than the Jinjiawi. If they really fought, they would definitely lose. You say, the man who jumped was eaten by the giant beast, or sank? Someone asked. Who cares? It's just a madman. The people of Skywheel City went back. This trip was peaceful, and the road back to the city was smooth. The Jinjiawi was not as lucky as the people of Skywheel City. Returning along the same road, they were blocked by a group of insects. Looking around, a large number of black beetles covered the sand. Boom! On a sand dune, the yellow sand was lifted. The blue carapace gradually revealed itself, and with the appearance of this beetle, the originally calm black tide of insects surged like waves. In Snowfield City, because some people attacked the palace a while ago, the losses were heavy. The Snowfield King, who was rarely injured, sat there with a gloomy face. He did not have a good complexion. He was also calculating the time, wondering why the Jinjiawi sent out had not come back. Chapter 351. When the Jinjiawi was sent out, the Snowfield King said, If you don't kill him, you don't have to come back. However, he was really angry. If he did not kill them, he would not kill all the Jinjiawi that he had painstakingly trained. However, what he did not expect was that his angry words would become a fact. In terms of individual combat strength, the Jinjiawi was indeed not outstanding. They were good at group battles, but the targets of their group battles had always been people and large desert beasts, not those small insects that could flexibly drill in and out of their armor and clothes. At the moment when the insect tide attacked, the Jinjiawi, who had always been calm, also panicked. The formation could not be maintained. The riding beasts that were bitten by the insects violently stomped their hooves, dodging left and right, but still could not get rid of the more and more intense pain. The chaotic formation of the Jinjiawi had dissipated a lot. Coupled with the riot of the riding beasts, the scene was even more unbearable. The Bailuo that had been hiding in the Jinjiawi originally relied on their wings to fly in the air to avoid the disaster. Unexpectedly, before they could fly high, they were thrown down by the beetles that spread their wings. These Bailuo were just domesticated tracking beasts, not combat type. Under the sweeping of the insect tide, it was difficult to resist. The screams, the beeping of the Bailuo, and the clanging of metal were endless. However, the battle did not last long. Those who could break out in a short time had successfully escaped the encirclement of the insect tide. Those who missed the opportunity, even if they could still hold on, could not last long. The pain of being bitten by the insects meant that they had become the food of these insects. Soon, they would only become a skeleton. The people who broke out of the insect tide were injured and rushed in the direction of Snowfield City. As long as they could reach the territory of Snowfield City, they would be much safer. However, they were unlucky. As soon as they escaped from the insect tide, they encountered the people who had attacked Snowfield City several times. When encountering the Jinjiawi, those people may not easily start, but when encountering the Jinjiawi who were in a difficult situation, not making a move was simply a waste of the knife in their hands. After waiting for a few days, the Snowfield King finally could not help but feel the disappearance of the Jinjiawi. The Jinjiawi were personally enslaved by the Snowfield King himself. If they were ordinary low-level slaves, although he could feel it, he would not care. Whether those people were assassinated or because of other accidents, he was not interested in paying attention. Anyway, there would be slaves dying every day. If they were not important slaves, he would be too lazy to pay attention. However, the Golden Armor Guards were different. Ever since he sent them out, he had been paying close attention to them until the connection between him and the Golden Armor Guards was forcefully cut off by the scythe of the Grim Reaper. Then he was hit by a dull hammer, causing him to have a splitting headache, and he could no longer remain calm. Bewilderment, panic, and disbelief. The Snowfield King suppressed all kinds of emotions in his heart and sent out a team of people to look for the Jinjiawi. Even if they only found the bodies, he wanted to know how those people were killed and where they were killed. The people who went out followed the route that the Jinjiawi had used to chase Xiao Xian. They searched all the way, but they never found any traces. The people who attacked the Jinjiawi had already erased the traces. Not even a bone or a stone would be left. Coupled with the desert climate and sandstorms, when the Snowfield King sent people to look for them, nothing was left. The team looking for the Jinjiawi came to the place where the Jinjiawi had encountered the insect tide and found some traces. However, when they saw those, everyone had the same feeling, as if they were in an ice cellar. Under the scorching sun, they only felt the chill on their backs rising sharply. Their teeth chattered as they looked at the situation in front of them. They shivered and did not even have the courage to go forward. On the vast yellow sand full of wrinkles, metal armors, and some broken clothes covered the skeletons. Those skeletons had been half buried in the sand. The exposed metal armors and those sharp metal weapons glittered under the light of Yangwang. It was a strange scene, not to mention how the desert reacted after the tragic situation of the Jinjiawi spread. On the other side, Xiao Xian, who was in the sea, finally stopped after falling. Xiao Xian thought that he was at the bottom of this place, but in the vision of his special ability, he found that this was not the case. The place under his feet was like the top of a mountain at the bottom of the sea. If he went down on both sides, he could go deeper into the sea. As for what the deeper part looked like, Xiao Xian did not have the ability or time to see it. The place under his feet was the source of the force that pulled Xiao Xian down. Looking around, Xiao Xian found that although the place was not flat, it was still quite wide. He had been under the sea for a long time. If he went on like this, he would suffocate to death. So Xiao Xian thought that he would save up his strength and swim up in one go. The sea behemoth above had left. Probably because of the appearance of the behemoth just now, there were no other fish around. Now, there should not be any other dangerous underwater creatures in a short time. Xiao Xian thought. This was an opportunity to rush out. However, Xiao Xian had saved up his strength. Just as he was about to swim upstream, the surrounding water suddenly changed. Unlike the way the behemoth flowed, it was a large-scale flow of seawater, as if to form a whirlpool. The seawater changed very quickly. In such a short time, Xiao Xian could not escape at all. He could only follow his instincts and lie down, holding tightly to the uneven stone ground under his feet. A whirlpool was indeed forming around him, but it was not the kind of whirlpool seen on the surface of the sea. It was formed vertically, and the center of the whirlpool was exactly where Xiao Xian was. The rotating water flow indicated that the stone ground was not completely in contact with the bottom of the sea. The rotating water flow could flow from below. There seemed to be a suction force around him, sucking away Xiao Xian's body temperature and making it as cold as the seawater. Feeling his body gradually lose consciousness, Xiao Xian had to mobilize his totemic power. The power that poured into every part of his body brought his lowered body temperature back to normal. When his body temperature returned to normal, it also increased Xiao Xian's perception. On land, If he casually mobilized his totemic power in the forest, he would be detected by the dire beasts. Therefore, if he wanted to hide and avoid the dire beasts, he would not easily mobilize his totemic power to the peak, unless it was the moment before a battle. Here, Xiao Xian was originally on guard against the dire beasts that sensed the totemic power and thought that their territory was being invaded. But gradually, Xiao Xian found that there were no dire beasts around. There was not even a small fish. The tearing force around him was getting stronger and stronger, and it was still rising rapidly. Xiao Xian felt that the wounds on his body that had already formed scabs had split open again. Blood splashed out from the wounds and into the sea. His whole body was under a huge tearing force. Xiao Xian felt that his bones were about to be dislocated. He could even hear the creaking sound of his bones, like wood shaking in a storm. Chapter 352. Gritting his teeth, Xiao Xian endured the dizziness caused by the lack of oxygen, as well as the pain of his bones breaking. All he could do was to hold on tightly to the uneven stone surface. He knew that if he let go, he would be pulled out by the force and become part of the whirlpool along with the seawater. If that was the case, there would be no chance of survival. It was as if a huge invisible net had formed around him, and any creature that touched this net would be caught. Under the strong tearing force around him, Xiao Xian had no time to treat the open wound. He could only mobilize his totemic power to close the wound as much as possible to reduce the bleeding. If he did not have the physical strength of a senior totemic warrior, if he did not have enough strength to replenish his strength, if he did not hold on to the stone surface with enough strength, Xiao Xian would not have been able to bear it. Finally, just as Xiao Xian was about to lose consciousness, everything calmed down again. Xiao Xian only felt that his body was lighter. The pressure of the seawater disappeared, and the tearing force around him disappeared without a trace. It was as if it had never existed, and it had suddenly disappeared. His trembling bones slowly calmed down, and his tense muscles also relaxed. It was not that Xiao Xian had let down his guard, but that he had no more strength left. He had already reached his limit by holding on until now. The sudden change had ended, and it seemed that he was temporarily safe. This made Xiao Xian let out a long sigh of relief. Breathe. Breathe again. It was smooth. There was air. Xiao Xian opened his eyes and looked around. At this moment, Xiao Xian mistakenly thought that he had come to another world, a world without seawater. However, after carefully observing his surroundings, Xiao Xian found that he was still holding on to the stone, and not far behind him was still the cliff at the bottom of the sea. The difference was that at this time, the seawater in this place was almost all gone. His clothes, hair, and the few seaweeds on the stone surface were all dried up as if they had been drained of water. On the stone surface, the seaweeds that had been drained of water cracked and broke into pieces when touched. Xiao Xian felt that he was also dehydrated. He drank all the remaining water in the kettle, but it could not replenish the water in his body. It was just an emergency. A huge hole formed around him. Outside this hole, the seawater was still flowing in a vertical circle, but it no longer affected the stone surface. It was very dark. This place was some distance from the surface of the sea, and there was very little light that could penetrate. Fortunately, Xiao Xian had a special ability to see. Sitting on the stone surface, Xiao Xian thought what to do next. The feeling of lack of oxygen was weakened. Of oxygen, of course, it was better than suffocation. A death. After calming down, his physical strength gradually recovered, and his mind gradually became clearer. He wanted to go out, but he did not know when this would. Should he stay here and wait, or should he walk along the long stone path in the hollow? Not divination. There was no rope on his body. Should he use cloth? This time, Xiao Xian did not intend to rely on the divination method that he did not know if it would succeed. Instead, he followed the shaman's words. When faced with difficulties, seek answers from the totem flame. When in darkness, the fire will light up the path ahead. It was just like when he was trapped in the king's stoneworm's cave. Closing his eyes, Xiao Xian felt the totem flame in his mind and carefully observed the movement of the flame. At this moment, his will almost merged with the flame. The flame jumped and floated to one side. Once, twice, thrice, after confirming that the movement of the flame was not accidental, Xiao Xian opened his eyes and looked ahead. In front of him was the direction of the flame. It was also a path that he could not see the end of and could not guess the future. Looking at the whirlpool of seawater around him, Xiao Xian took a deep breath and lifted his feet. Hesitation would only waste time. Since he had made a decision, he naturally had to act quickly. Xiao Xian did not know how long this hole would last, or if it would disappear halfway. But since the fire had made this choice, he would try. In fact, even without using the fire, he had the intuition to move forward. Indeed, it should be safest to stay here and wait for the change to disappear and then return to the surface. But Xiao Xian still intended to follow his intuition and the fire's choice. Even if this was a path of no return, he would continue. The surroundings were very quiet, as if all the sounds of the outside world had been blocked. Only the sound of Xiao Xian's footsteps could be heard. It was empty, as if Xiao Xian was the only person left in the world. When he was hungry, Xiao Xian scraped the dried seaweed from the stone ground to eat. It was very rare to see seaweed that could still cling to the stone ground under such a strong tearing force. It did not taste good, but it did not take much to replenish Xiao Xian's strength, so he would not starve to death. Xiao Xian also discovered that even though the seaweed had been drained of water, its roots that were deeply embedded in the stone ground were still intact. If everything returned to its original state and seawater covered this place again, it might continue to grow normally. It was really a strong plant that could survive in extreme environments. The further he went, the darker the hole became. At first, Xiao Xian could still feel an extremely dim light coming from above, but as he walked, that dim light disappeared. Xiao Xian did not know how long he had been walking in this dark hole, nor did he know how long he had been eating the dried seaweed. Every day, except for the time spent resting and eating, he had been running forward, fearing that the hole would return to its original state in the next moment, and he would be buried in the sea. This sense of pressure had been urging Xiao Xian to run faster. He also had a water source. He carried the rainstone given by Yang Sui, which could condense water. This hole was only drained of water in a short period of time, but after the hole was formed, the water on the rainstone could still form normally. Moreover, he did not know if it was because he was at the bottom of the sea and was surrounded by water, but the speed of condensing water in this stone was much faster than in the desert. Xiao Xian was very lucky to have this stone with him. Otherwise, he would have died of thirst. When Xiao Xian's taste buds were not sensitive to the seaweed, there seemed to be some dim light around him. Xiao Xian did not know if this was a short period of time, or if he was approaching the end. When he saw a mountain wall, he was sure that he had reached the end. The hole ended here, and the stone ground was close to the mountain wall. However, the surroundings were still the same. Xiao Xian had no choice but to continue waiting for the sea to return to its original state. Every day, he still maintained the same state as when he was on the road, eating, drinking, running, and exercising to maintain the best physical strength and state to face the powerful tearing changes that might happen next. After a while, the movement of the sea finally changed. The air was pulled away in the blink of an eye, and the surrounding water vapor gradually thickened, and the powerful, tearing force reappeared. Holding his breath, Xiao Xian, who was ready, calmly hugged the stone ground. When everything was over, Xiao Xian swam desperately upward. Splash! His head emerged from the sea and breathed in the air with the smell of the sea. Because he used his special vision ability most of the time in the sea, it did not take long for him to adapt to the bright world. Opening his eyes, the dazzling Yangguang made Xiao Xian fall into a trance for a moment. He even felt that he did not know what year it was. In front of him, it was not a high cliff, but a piece of land. Some columnar cacti grew on the land, and some animals that looked very similar to camels stood up and bit off the flowers from the columnar cacti. A camel chewed on a cactus flower and looked at the sea. When it saw the people on the sea, it flicked its long ears twice. Chapter 353. Xiao Xian swam from the sea to the shore. There were no other creatures in the sea because of the changes in the sea below, but once the changes were over, more sea creatures would appear here. Xiao Xian didn't dare to take the risk. After going ashore, Xiao Xian finally had a feeling of being on solid ground. When he was in the sea, although he was stepping on the stone ground because he was still in the sea, surrounded by seawater, he didn't have the feeling of being on land. He had to constantly worry about the hole disappearing at any time. His heart was always hanging, and his nerves never relaxed. He was really physically and mentally exhausted. Taking a deep breath, feeling the dry sand around him and the wind mixed with the smell of the sea, Xiao Xian had a feeling of being alive again. This feeling made him want to release his voice and roar a few times. However, in such a strange place, making a sound may cause some unnecessary trouble. Therefore, Xiao Xian could only hold back. Not far from a slightly higher place, a few camel beasts were chewing cactus flowers with a look of contempt. They raised their heads slightly, but their line of sight was lower in the terrain where Xiao Xian was located. Some of them had seen humans before, but they had never seen anyone appear in this place near the sea. They had never seen anyone here since they were born. Therefore, the appearance of Xiao Xian surprised them. However, even if this species was surprised, the expression on their faces was still the same, a despicable look. The surrounding ground was very dry. Although it was close to the sea, the scorching temperature from the surrounding sand and stone ground, as well as the sparse and withered unknown plants around, told Xiao Xian that it probably hadn't rained here for a while. Unlike the desert at the other end of the sea, this was not pure sand. It was just that because of the drought and long-term weathering, there were more fine sand and stones. In other words, it was more like a mountain, just close to the sea and not so high. Perhaps a long, long time ago, the sea level was not as high as it was now, and the long stone belt connecting the two ends of the sea under the sea was exposed to the water. In the stone room where the notes were stored in Snowfield City, the blind old slave had said that the slave owners came from the sea. They might have passed through the narrow stone zone from here. Xiao Xian thought of the feeling he had when he was at the bottom of the sea, and the thought of the fire seed when he made his choice. Could it be that some people from the Yin Jiao tribe who had disappeared for a long time also came to this land from the other side of the sea through that narrow and long rocky area? Xiao Xian didn't feel the existence of the fire seed, so he wasn't sure if the Yin Jiao tribe really existed on this continent. However, he wasn't discouraged. Nearly 1,000 years had passed, and anything could happen. Just as Shu had said, there was a crisis in the tribe, and that part of the Yin Jiao tribesmen had disappeared because they were looking for a solution. Thinking up to this point, Xiao Xian was suddenly filled with anticipation. After shaking off the water on his body, Xiao Xian drank some of the water he collected from the animal skin bag. His water bottle had broken when he was at the bottom of the sea, so he could only use the animal skin bag with rainstones as a water bag. The skin of the fierce beast was strong enough. Although the bag had been used to store other things, in order to survive, he didn't care too much. It was a good time to relax. Without the pressure of the sea, every cell in his body seemed to have a carefree atmosphere. His physical strength was rapidly recovering, and Xiao Xian swung his arms and walked along the sand and stones. He didn't go far immediately. For the time being, he didn't detect the existence of other threatening beasts, but if he walked for a while on land, it might not be the case. What he needed now was to quickly replenish his physical strength, not to find a beast to duel. Speaking of which, after being a vegetarian for so long, as a Yin Jiao who had always been a carnivore, Xiao Xian felt his teeth itch. Looking at the several camel beasts that were looking at him from a higher place, Xiao Xian couldn't help but imagine them all as roasted whole camels. Xiao Xian still wanted to wait until his physical strength was fully recovered before dealing with the camel beasts. Unexpectedly, the other party was quite alert. It seemed to be aware of Xiao Xian's intention. It raised its head and turned its neck, turned around, and left. It didn't give Xiao Xian any extra glances. Xiao Xian, seeing the camel beasts leave, Xiao Xian didn't chase after them. Instead, He waited until his physical strength was almost recovered and he had enough ability to protect himself before moving. It was really dry here. As he walked forward, the surrounding plants were mostly column-shaped cacti. Some of the flowers on the cacti pillars were eaten by the camel beasts just now. Even though they were animals that were good at living in dry areas, they still needed to replenish their water supply. If they didn't see any fresh water and didn't want to lick the seawater, they could only nibble on the flowers. The flowers on the cacti could provide them with the water they needed to survive temporarily. As he walked forward, there were more and more column-shaped cacti around him. They were also much taller. Even if there were flowers on the cacti, the camel beasts wouldn't be able to eat them. The surroundings were very dry, and there were obvious cracks in many places on the ground. The surrounding heat waves seemed to want to drain all the water from the ground, constantly scraping. However, it didn't take long for Xiao Xian to feel the changes in his surroundings. The wind blowing from the sea was cool, completely different from the heat waves on the ground. The changes in the surroundings cooled the warm and humid airflow over the land, and soon formed a white fog. Standing in a high place, Xiao Xian could see some white fog clouds near the coast. The wind from the sea blew the white fog towards the land. It was as if there was fog around him, and soon, more and more white fog shrouded him. When Xiao Xian breathed, he could feel the obvious increase in the water vapor in the air. On the plants growing around him, water droplets condensed from the fog gradually appeared on the branches and leaves. On the cactus pillars, water droplets gradually condensed on the slender thorns, growing from small to large, sparkling and translucent. Xiao Xian even saw plants like lichens attached to some cacti. When the fog appeared, they would absorb the water vapor in the white fog like a sponge. The fact that such plants could survive meant that white fog often appeared in this place. It was no wonder that although the surroundings were dry, there were still some plants. Unlike the barren desert on the other side of the sea, there were more and more animals moving around, and the water allowed life to continue. Living in such a place, every animal knew how to use the natural environment to survive better. Small flying birds came over one after another, landing from the air and resting on the cactus pillars, drinking the dew condensed on the cactus thorns. In a place where there was little rain but a lot of fog, the dew brought by the fog was almost a life-saving resource for all the animals living around. Because there were many animals moving around, Xiao Xian was on guard, but found that there were mostly small animals here, and most of them were not a threat to him. As for large beasts, Xiao Xian hadn't seen them yet. Xiao Xian also collected some dew. He couldn't always rely on the rainstone. In the sea, the rainstone's ability to condense water was very strong, but on the shore the surrounding was still dry, so the efficiency was low. So, when there was an opportunity to collect water, Xiao Xian naturally wouldn't let it go. Chapter 354. The further they went, the less dense the fog around them. However, it was still there. Unlike the places he had been to before, there were fewer small beasts active here, and the atmosphere was not as harmless as before. It was full of quiet tension. Xiao Xian tied up the animal skin bag and held the only short knife in his hand. He stepped lightly and cautiously forward. At this moment, Xiao Xian heard voices. He had not seen anyone for a long time, and now he finally heard people's voices. Although he was vigilant, Xiao Xian's heart relaxed a lot. It was good that there were people. He was afraid that this was just an uninhabited land. With a change of direction, Xiao Xian went in the direction of the voices. The fog there was thicker. Listening carefully, there were two people's voices. Moreover, Xiao Xian could understand what they were saying. The language here was more inclined to the language used by the slave owners. This also proved that the slave owners back then might have really passed through here. Once again proving a guess, Xiao Xian was in a better mood. The two people seemed to be collecting dew, as well as some plants that absorbed the dew. Is this enough? A young woman dressed in coarse cloth looked at the basket she was carrying and asked the person next to her. The young man standing next to her, vigilantly looking around, quickly glanced at the basket, shook his head and said, "Look for more. It hasn't rained for a long time. If it continues like this, it will be difficult. That's true. Then look for more. Be careful of your surroundings. I know. Be careful. Back off. The young man took 2 steps forward, blocking the woman behind him. He held a long, strange-looking knife in his hand and looked not far away. Not far from them, some sand and stones were moving slowly, making a subtle, rustling sound. Below, something was squirming. But soon, the movement suddenly became louder. The other party seemed to know that they had been discovered and no longer hid. A long line protruded from the ground, and with a puff, like a spray of water vapor, the sand and stones on the ground rolled up, and the protruding line formed a long dragon. A dark brown giant insect that was more than 3 meters wide and 10 meters long rushed out from the ground. It had many legs, and its body was segmented and covered with hard plates like armor. It quickly came towards the 2 people. The young man's body suddenly erupted with an aura, and with this aura, some earth-colored lines appeared on his body. This was a totem warrior. The giant worm stood up like a snake and attacked the 2 of them. It seemed to have noticed that the man was more difficult to deal with. After 2 unsuccessful attacks, it changed its target and went around the young man. It bared its fangs and attacked the woman who was holding the basket tightly. Although the young woman was a little weaker in terms of combat power, she was also good at running away. If she didn't have the ability to run for her life, it would be impossible for her to survive here. However, under the giant insect's attack, she was very embarrassed. There was a lot of fog around, and the ground was not flat, which reduced her speed. If she slipped, her speed would be greatly reduced, and it would affect her escape. Seeing that the giant insect had changed its target, the young man was anxious. He ran over, trying to stop the giant insect before it attacked. Even if he couldn't stop it, he had to attract the attention of the giant insect. Just when the 2 people were anxious, there was a bang. The giant insect that was about to attack the young woman was suddenly hit by a big stone. Probably not expecting to be attacked like this, the giant insect was stunned and didn't know what was going on. Before it could recover, another rock came crashing down. This time, the force was stronger, fiercer, and more accurate. It directly hit its 2 open fangs, causing it to almost fall over. When the giant insect stabilized, crack! A tooth fell from the giant insect's mouth. The other tooth of the giant insect wasn't so bad, but it was still hurt. Even if its body was hard, it couldn't withstand one big stone after another, not to mention that it lost a tooth. How could it continue like this? There was no sound, but the giant insect's actions showed that it was angry. No one would be able to remain calm if a tooth was smashed off while hunting. Abandoning its original prey, the giant insect turned to look for the source of the stone. It had already sensed the location of the person who threw the stone. The vision of the average person was limited in this kind of fog, but the giant insect was different. It could even accurately find prey within a few hundred meters in the thicker fog. The furious giant insect rushed in the direction of Xian. Originally, it thought that the little guy who threw the stone would definitely run away when he saw it coming, so it would have to spend some effort to chase him. However, the reality was completely different. The person who threw the stone not only didn't run away, but also rushed straight in its direction. Looking at the momentum of the rush, it was not afraid at all. Xian hadn't hunted for a long time. He had been repeating the boring activities at the bottom of the sea: eating, drinking, sleeping, running. As a Yinjiao, he probably yearned for the exciting hunting life in the mountains. After coming ashore, his hands began to itch. When he saw the group of camel beasts, he almost made a move. If it wasn't for the fact that he needed to recover his strength, he would have done it long ago. Now that he saw the scene in front of him, of course he had to make a move. The totemic power in his body exploded. At this moment, Xian could even hear the powerful beating of his heart, like the beating of war drums before a battle, encouraging him. His blood was surging, and every part of his body was filled with a sense of impatience. How long had it been since he felt this way? After a long silence, Xian once again found the carefree and hot-blooded feeling he had when he was hunting in the mountains with the same tribesmen. His strength, unwilling to be silent, became fierce, like the waves of the sea, as if it was going to sweep everything away. Every step he took on the ground made a roaring sound, like a heavy beast's paw slapping the ground. Compared to the two people before, Xiao Xian at this moment was more like a fierce beast living in the mountains. It was refreshing to stretch out with full strength, then retract, then suddenly explode in the next moment. Just as the giant worm stood up and was about to attack, Xiao Xian stomped on the ground. The sand and stones under his feet exploded, and the air was blown into the air by this stomp. Much of the fog was dispersed. The tyrannical force propelled his body forward, and Xiao Xian rushed towards the giant worm like a cannonball. He broke through the fog and kicked the giant worm's throat. That was where the giant worm's fangs and two long forelimbs could not reach. The giant worm had actually felt Xiao Xian's aura before it attacked and hesitated. But it was too late to do anything now. Retreat? There was no way to retreat. Even if it felt that something was wrong, what could it do? Xiao Xian's kick was faster than the giant worm's, and it had no time to react. Bang! The sound of the collision was like a huge hammer hitting a mountain rock, and it sounded in this world shrouded in white fog. Taking advantage of the giant worm's change of target, the young man from before took the girl a little further away. Then, he turned back to look at the giant worm. At first, he was still thinking about who had come to help them, so that he could immediately return to fight with the other party. However, when he turned his head, he saw the clear body of the worm flying out of the fog with a loud bang that made their hearts skip a beat. Flying, the eyelids of the two young men twitched at the same time, and they even had the urge to rub their eyes to see if it was an illusion brought on by the fog. After landing, the long body of the worm rolled a few times on the sand and stones, knocking down a few cacti. There were sounds of hard chunks falling around them, and one of them fell by the young man's feet. He looked at it and saw that it was the shell of the giant worm's scales that had fallen off. There was still some worm skin stuck on the inside of the shell, and the shell was used to protect the worm's body like armor, but a few pieces had been kicked off. This. The young man swallowed his saliva. Who the hell is this? Holding the saber in his hand, the young man thought to himself, even if I used the saber in my hand to chop it, it would be difficult to even leave a deep mark on the shell, let alone break the shell. The other party actually managed to kick the shell off. From the looks of it, the worm's belly was kicked upside down. After being kicked, the giant worm that was rolling on the ground felt that Xiao Xian's momentum was still rising. Seeing that Xiao Xian didn't seem to be satisfied with the kick and wanted to do it again, it didn't care about the pain and quickly crawled into the ground. For a short time, it couldn't eat because of its throat injury, and the other injuries on its body also needed time to heal. In any case, it didn't plan to come out for a while. No, it would even leave this place and avoid it. When the giant worm left, the two young men who came out to collect nervously looked at the figure in the fog walking towards them. Although they were very grateful for the other party's rescue, they couldn't remain calm after seeing the scene just now. They were so nervous that their foreheads were sweating. They wanted to say something, but their throats seemed to be stuck. They opened their mouths a few times, but couldn't make sound. They didn't know what kind of tone to use and what kind of words to say. If they angered the other party, would the two of them also be kicked? Xiao Xian slowly walked in the direction of the two men. He had just finished the battle, and the power in his body hadn't calmed down. He was still lingering and didn't seem to be satisfied. The air on the surface of his body vibrated, and even the fog around Xiao Xian's body was dispelled. Running at the bottom of the sea for such a long time was tough and uncomfortable. Both physical and mental pressure had impacted Xiao Xian's body, but he did not weaken. On the contrary, it was as if his body had been tempered and became stronger. The leg that kicked the giant worm was slightly numb, but it wasn't uncomfortable or injured. When he rushed out, he seemed to already know that the kick wouldn't hurt him. When Xiao Xian came closer, the two men finally saw Xiao Xian's appearance clearly. Because he hadn't changed his clothes for a long time, Xiao Xian's cloth clothes had already become rags, revealing his body. The smooth lines of his muscles were like the hardest stone that had been polished. If they hadn't seen the scene with their own eyes, they wouldn't have been able to imagine how terrifying the power contained in this person's body was. The two men looked at the appearance of the person who had kicked the giant worm. He was quite young, and the other party looked at them with a kind and amiable gaze. He didn't give off a fierce feeling. From appearance alone, the two men really couldn't imagine that this person had such ability. Chapter 355. Seeing that the other two had been silent, Xiao Xian took the lead to break the silence. "Hello." Xiao Xian smiled at the two in a friendly manner. The barbaric and ferocious momentum of kicking the giant insect had disappeared without a trace. With Xiao Xian's words, the atmosphere eased a lot, and the tension of the young man and woman suddenly relaxed. "Hello. Hello." Although the atmosphere eased, the young man still stuttered when he opened his mouth. He was still nervous facing Xiao Xian, but thinking that Xiao Xian had just helped them, he also showed a smile. "Thank you for just now. We are from the Maka tribe. My name is Wanfu, and her name is Shuirue." According to Wanfu's introduction, the two of them were husband and wife. They were married not long ago. The tribe was some distance from here, but not too far. After all, there are not many tribes in this remote and arid place. Their Maka tribe was already the closest to here. Because it had not rained for a long time, the two did not store water at home. Their family had difficulty living, so they came here to look for opportunities. They did not know when the fog would appear, but in order to wait for the fog to come, in order to collect water, they were willing to continue to wait. Fortunately, their luck was good this time. In less than 2 days, they encountered the fog. They came to a place where the fog was thicker to collect some moist, edible plants, and also collected some water to bring back. "By the way, which tribe are you from?" After introducing themselves, Wanfu asked Xiao Xian. "My name is Xiao Xian. As for my tribe, I don't know where it is located on this land because I was born and raised outside and have never seen a tribe. My parents and ancestors were born and raised outside." Xiao Xian was right. He was indeed born in a place outside this land. If there was another part of the Yinjiao people on this land, he did not know where the tribe was and had never seen anyone else. Hearing Xiao Xian say so, the expression of the two people looking at Xiao Xian suddenly changed, summed up in one word: pitiful. Xiao Xian. At first, Xiao Xian was still wondering how much of this lame story would convince the two of them. If he said this on the other side of the sea, people who heard this would definitely think that it was nonsense. Living outside and never seeing other people in the tribe, weren't they just wanderers? How could wanderers be so powerful? How could a wanderer suddenly become a senior totem warrior? It was better to find a better excuse. However, in this place, the two young men really believed Xiao Xian's words and did not doubt him at all. Xiao Xian couldn't help but feel puzzled. The two of them weren't stupid. At the very least, they were still on guard. However, they didn't doubt Xiao Xian's words. In other words, the situation here might be different from that on the other side of the sea. When Xiao Xian looked at the totem patterns on the young warrior's body, he noticed that the totem patterns on the young warrior's body were brighter. Even though they were only the grayish-yellow color of sand, they didn't appear dull. Instead, they gave off a sense of vitality. This was different from the totem patterns on the vast majority of totem warriors that Xiao Xian had seen before. In the Yinjiao tribe, except for Xiao Xian, when other people used their totem power, the totem patterns on their bodies were also dark. There were many strange places. "Have you heard of Yinjiao?" Xiao Xian carefully observed the reaction of the two. This was a new place. If there were Yinjiao people here, he didn't know what kind of attitude other people would have towards the Yinjiao tribe. When Xiao Xian went from the other side of the river to the other side to look for the old land, he had always been high profile and didn't hide anything. Because he was high profile, the shaman let him spread the name of Yinjiao. Xiao Xian naturally wouldn't restrain himself. But here, Xiao Xian had to be cautious. There were too many strange places. Wanfu and Shuri were still a little confused about the word Yinjiao. The word was unfamiliar to them. Is Yinjiao the tribe of your ancestors? Or is it something else? Wanfu asked. Seeing that the reaction of the two people was not defensive and hostile, Xiao Xian nodded and said, yes. Thinking about it, Wanfu scratched his head and apologized to Xiao Xian. I seem to have heard of it, but I can't remember. Then forget it. I'll look for it later. Xiao Xian was slightly disappointed. Wanfu and Shuri saw Xiao Xian like this, and their hearts once again lamented. Poor man. For this young man who had helped her and had a poor life, Shuri couldn't help but sympathize, pulling the corner of Wanfu's clothes. Wanfu knew what Shuri meant, and he himself had the same idea. So he said to Xiao Xian, "Do you have any arrangements now? Why don't we go back to the Maka tribe together? We also want to thank you." Xiao Xian thought for a moment. Well, then I'll bother you. He really needed a place to get to know this strange continent well, inquire more information, and get a complete set of clothes to wear. With Xiao Xian following, Wanfu and Shuri were much more relaxed. Knowing that Xiao Xian was strong, they were not too worried. There were not many threatening giant beasts here. Most of the time, they could solve it by themselves. Otherwise, they would not dare to come here with just two people. Encountering a giant insect was just bad luck. After chatting a lot with Xiao Xian, Wanfu also let go of some things and said a lot. We came out with the rest of the tribe. When we came here, we split up, and then we'll meet again in another place. There's no other way. It hasn't rained for a long time, and the spring water on the mountain has been cut off. Everyone's life is difficult, unless we go farther to find water. We don't want to go farther, so we came here to try our luck. Xiao Xian watched them squeeze the water absorbed by the lichen into the clay pot. They did not let go of the lichen. After squeezing the water, they threw it into the basket and brought it back. This lichen was edible. Following Wanfu and Shuri, Xiao Xian also learned some survival methods here, what things could be eaten and what things could not be touched. If it rains, we don't have to run so far to find dew, Wanfu said with emotion. Although his mouth was full of emotion, he did not complain much. Living in such a dry place, he had long been accustomed to it. In his memory, there were longer dry periods, but they all survived. The methods were found by oneself. Only people who did not want to do anything and did not want to do anything would die of thirst. Seeing the appearance of Wanfu and Shuri, Xiao Xian glanced at the vines wrapped around a tree that was not thick. Some branches of the vines had withered because of the drought a few days ago. Xiao Xian casually tore off a piece, and his hands began to move. Wanfu, who was collecting dew and talking to himself, did not notice Xiao Xian's movements. After a short while, Xiao Xian finished the knot, looked at the conclusion, tore the knot, and threw it away. 10 days later, at noon, it should be able to rain, Xiao Xian said. Wanfu and Shuri's movements of collecting water paused because of this sentence, and they both looked at Xiao Xian in surprise. You know how to read the weather? A little. Xiao Xian did not say much. Wanfu and Shuri looked at each other, not knowing whether to believe Xiao Xian's words or not. However, no matter what, they still had to collect dew now. Even if it rained 10 days later, they still needed to get through these 10 days. After the jars and baskets were full, the two left and went to the place where they agreed to meet with the tribes. The further they went, the thinner the fog became, and the air became hotter. When they felt the scorching heat again, the surroundings were still dry and barren, far less vibrant than the fog-shrouded place. When they went to the meeting place, Wanfu hunted a beast, and Xiao Xian also hunted too. Although they were not as good as the giant worm, they had more meat. Even if the giant worm was a vicious beast, it did not have much meat and could not eat much. Xiao Xian, who has been a vegetarian for a long time, did not care about being picky. Of the two beasts, one was for Xiao Xian to eat himself, and the other was for Wanfu after he went to the Maka tribe. He planned to stay in the Maka tribe for a while, so naturally, he had to bring some gifts. He could not rely on the credit of saving people. When the sun was slanting, Xiao Xian also saw the other people of the Maka tribe who came out with the Wanfu couple. Several of them were injured, but fortunately, no one died. This was already a very good situation. Wanfu introduced Xiao Xian to them. Originally, when they saw Xiao Xian's rags, they still had some disgust. When they caught a glimpse of the two beasts that Xiao Xian hunted, their faces eased a lot. Some of them also hunted some beasts, but they were not as good as Xiao Xian's, and the quantity was not as good. When they returned to the Maka tribe, the others saw Xiao Xian carrying 2 beasts and chatting with Wanfu easily. He was not even out of breath, and they could not help but be surprised. However, the Wanfu couple also said that after seeing Xiao Xian throw a stone at the giant worm and kick the giant worm, they were not surprised. Chapter 356. For the strong, everyone was always in awe. They gradually restrained their slightly disgusted look because of Xiao Xian's ragged clothes. When the sun was close to the horizon, Xiao Xian finally saw the place where the Maka tribe was located. The stone wall separated the Maka tribe from the outside. Looking from a high place, one could see the stone houses inside. Although they were not high, they were still orderly. Some houses also specially surrounded the yard with stones. For Wanfu to bring back a stranger, the people of the Maka tribe did not intend to pay attention. But Xiao Xian's ragged clothes and the 2 beasts he was carrying were too contradictory. The people who saw this scene could not help but take a few more glances. Who was this person? Really strange. Xiao Xian already knew on the way here that many of the tribes here were no longer bound by totems. They also had things of faith, but most of them were spiritual sustenance, not the main source of power. If a stranger was accepted by a family, as long as he did not do anything that hindered the tribe, he could be accepted by the tribe and become a member of it. The closer he got to the Maka tribe, the deeper the doubts in Xiao Xian's heart. He did not feel the existence of the fire seed in the Maka tribe. Asking about the fire pit, Xiao Xian knew that in the Maka tribe there was a fire pit. Perhaps it was a custom passed down by the ancestors, and it would be used during the sacrifice. However, unlike the tribes that Xiao Xian knew before, there was no fire seed in their fire pit. Not only the Maka tribe, Wanfu told Xiao Xian that other tribes were also like this. As for the fire seed, the ancestors would only mention it when they told stories to the younger generation. However, no one could say clearly how the fire seed disappeared. Many of them were glossed over because they were not clear. It was too long ago, and they had no way to know. Living with Wanfu were 2 old people and his elder brother's family. Wanfu's elder brother, Wanfa, did not go with them to collect dew. Instead, he went with another team to look for water in another direction, but he only brought back some dried fruits. It was not a fruitless return. Xiao Xian temporarily lived in the Maka tribe. He also told Wanfu that he was only staying temporarily and would leave in a few days. Fa didn't have a good temper like his younger brother. When he saw Xiao Xian, he glanced at Xiao Xian with a picky and defensive look, as if he was looking at someone with bad intentions. Even when Xiao Xian brought 2 wild beasts, his attitude did not change. Xiao Xian's rags had already caused Fa to despise him. Seeing that Xiao Xian was actually using a stone knife, Fa despised him even more. This person was actually using a stone knife. It was no wonder that he only had rags that he had been wearing for who knew how long. Stone knives were only used by his grandfather's 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 grandfather. In their tribe, those who were slightly capable had metal knives. In the eyes of Fa and the others, Xiao Xian was just a poor guy with great strength. Fa waved his slightly deformed and scratched short sword in front of Xiao Xian as if he was showing off. Not only the Wanfu brothers, but most of the people of the Maka tribe had metal weapons on hand, or they were composite weapons. Weapons made of wood and animal horns combined with metal. As for pure stone weapons, except for some old people, the young warriors did not use them. Of course, there were also people who thought they were smart. They saw that Xiao Xian's stone knife was extraordinary. Under the guise of looking at you, I'll help you, they wanted to use their rusty knife to exchange for Xiao Xian's stone knife. Xiao Xian certainly did not exchange. He just calmly looked at the other party. Seeing that the other party was uncomfortable, he took the initiative to give up and leave. Even if Xiao Xian's eyes were calm, the people who faced Xiao Xian had a feeling of breathlessness. It was as if there was a big hand covering the top of their head, and it could come down at any time. Wanfu's attitude had always been very good. He took out a set of his old clothes, let Shuri change it a little, and gave it to Xiao Xian to wear. They did not have new cloth, and of course, there were no new clothes. Xiao Xian did not care about wearing old clothes. It was better than wearing rags. Xiao Xian's appetite was big. He hunted 2 beasts. One was given to Wan Fu's family, and the other was eaten by himself. He only cared about it for 1 day. The next day, he went out to hunt again and brought back one. Every day, he would go out to hunt, eat it himself, and give some to Wan Fu's family. Because of Xiao Xian's frequent movements, some people who originally disliked Xiao Xian began to have careful thoughts. Especially the young girls of the Maka tribe. The frequency of walking to Wan Fu's door increased a lot. Some people dressed up every day to deliberately block Xiao Xian in order to say a few more words. If they found such a hunter, they would not have to worry about starvation for the rest of their lives. Seeing that Xiao Xian's popularity was rising, the young people of the Maka tribe provoked Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian adopted a strategy of ignoring most of the time, and if he could not avoid it, he would end it quickly. There were not many senior totem warriors in this tribe. Most of the young people were intermediate totem warriors like Wan Fu. Xiao Xian was not interested in bullying these people. After understanding Xiao Xian's strength, the number of people who challenged him gradually decreased. Instead, there were several high-level members of the Maka tribe. For those who had the ability, they were certainly willing to retain them. Knowing that Xiao Xian was only staying temporarily, they repeatedly sent people to persuade Xiao Xian to stay and also promised some benefits. Unfortunately, they could not make Xiao Xian change his mind. For this reason, they regretted for several days. Because of Xiao Xian's temporary residence, the living conditions of Wan Fu's family were obviously improved by grade. The elderly and children in the family also seemed to be more energetic, but the problem of water was still difficult to solve. Xiao Xian could not help them. The efficiency of the rainstones in his hands was not high in dry places. However, the water that Wan Fu and the others collected last time can last for 10 days if they save a little. After 10 days, everything would be fine. Seeing that Xiao Xian was distributing meat every day, Wan Fu, who originally wanted to repay the kindness, did not expect that the kindness was not much. Instead, he received a lot of benefits from the other party. There was not much that he could help Xiao Xian, and his heart was even more guilty. He could only pull out what he knew when Xiao Xian asked something, and ask others if he did not know. This helped Xiao Xian a lot. On this day, Xiao Xian had lived in the Maka tribe for 10 days. He had a preliminary understanding of this place and did not intend to continue to live here. Walking to the door of the house, Xiao Xian looked up at the sky. "Hey, Xiao Xian, you don't go out today?" Wan Fu, who had just woken up, saw that Xiao Xian did not go out and asked in surprise. During this time, Xiao Xian went out in the morning every day and came back when the sun was tilting. Wan Fu's people were already used to it. Even if they went out to hunt, they would not go out every day. Xiao Xian was a special case. Sure enough, a real warrior was different from others. Seeing Xiao Xian look up at the sky, Wan Fu remembered what Xiao Xian said to them about rain 10 days ago. He went to the door and looked up at the sky. The sun was still high in the sky, and there were some floating clouds in the sky. But in this place, sometimes clouds did not mean that it would rain. Looking at the shape and shape was useless. Sometimes, looking at the dark clouds and rolling thunder, it did not take long for the sky to clear again. It was not uncommon. "I'm leaving today. Thank you for your hospitality." Xiao Xian turned and said, You're leaving?" Shuwei, who came out, was also surprised. She knew the changes in the family during this time. Now there was still a lot of meat in the family that had not been eaten and was hung outside to dry. Many people envied their family for having such a person. Unfortunately, he was leaving. Also, such a person would not be trapped in a remote place like the Maka tribe. Even if he went to the city-state, or to those big tribes, he could easily stay. When Xiao Xian came, he did not bring many things, and when he left, he did not bring much. The most obvious thing was that he changed his clothes, and he did not look so embarrassed. When Xiao Xian left, he met a traveling team of Maka coming back from the outside. This team went to farther places to trade, and also helped the tribes bring back some things, such as metal weapons and new cloth. In the traveling team, there were 3 senior totem warriors, 2 middle-aged men, and 1 older. However, Xiao Xian was not afraid of them, not to mention that he was already leaving, so he did not look at this team. However, the people in the team saw Xiao Xian, a stranger, and glanced at him a few more times. Wanfu sent Xiao Xian out of the tribe, and then went back. Wanfu, who was that person just now? There were people in the traveling team who were familiar with Wanfu and asked, "Oh, his name is Xiao Xian. He saved me and Shurui and lived in our house for 10 days. He is very powerful and can go out to hunt beasts every day." Wanfu talked about Xiao Xian's matter. When he met a familiar friend, Wanfu's words were more. He described the situation when Xiao Xian saved them in detail, and also added some words to polish it, which could arouse the interest of the listeners. Wow, so powerful. Yes, very powerful. Wanfu nodded vigorously. Every time he said this, many people did not believe it, saying that he was too exaggerated. However, he really did not exaggerate, and what he said was the truth. Some people in the returning team also heard Wanfu's words. Like others, they felt that Wanfu's words were only 30% true, at most 50%. The young people in the tribe always exaggerated things. However, the leaders of the team thought more about it. A hale and hearty old man looked at the person next to him and said, "Why do I feel that this method of directly moving a big stone to smash a behemoth sound a bit familiar?" "Me too. I just can't remember where I heard it." The person next to the old man also said, "Such a fierce and arrogant method of fighting. I have indeed heard it. I should have heard it when I went to the city-state before." The 3 people with the highest status in the team said so, and the others did not have much to say. No matter what they thought, they would not refute the words of these 3 elders. After a moment of silence, the old man asked Wanfu, "I just saw him talk to you before he left. What was he talking about?" Wanfu looked serious. This was the father of the current leader of the tribe. His position in the tribe was very high, and he had to be treated with respect. Seeing this question, Wanfu did not hide it and seriously replied, 10 days ago, when we went out to collect, Xiao Xian said that it would rain this afternoon. Just now, he reminded me to wash the big jar full of jerky at home and wait for the water." As soon as Wanfu's voice fell, a few younger people could not help but laugh. "Huh, you believe this? Who does he think he is? Is he?" Here, some people that were not collectively called witches, but different according to gender. Men were witches, women were witches, and the names were different. That's right. How did he fall into such a situation? Also born outside, don't know where the tribe is? Full of lies. Extremely bad. Someone answered, "You should be beaten up and thrown out. Only you, Wanfu, would believe it. How old are you? Still so easily deceived." The young people spoke one after another, but the 3 people with the highest status in the team did not make a sound. They seemed to be contemplating. After a long while, the old man smiled casually. "Probably I think too much. Okay, everyone hurry up and move the things back." Wanfu intended to defend Xiao Xian, but the leader's father had spoken, so he could only swallow the defense. But after returning, Wanfu and Shurui quickly cleaned up the pots and jars in the house. Noon gradually passed. The young people who returned to the tribe from the expedition team were bragging to their friends about what they had seen and heard on this trip, while the elders were in the house to summarize and discuss the expedition. Rumble. Thunder seemed to roll from a distance. Whether it was the young people who were bragging outside or the elders who were discussing in the house, they all stopped moving. The rest of the Maka tribe also stopped what they were doing and ran out to look at the sky. The scorching sun in the sky was quickly being blocked by the clouds. The wind was blowing fiercely, and the clouds were rapidly increasing and thickening at a speed visible to the naked eye, like an army passing through. Rumble, thunder sounded one after another. This time, it did not look like it was just thunder and not rain, but it was really raining. "Hurry up, clear out the jars in the house." Someone shouted, "Oh, my house is filled with things. Now is the time to think about other things. Quickly clear it out. What about the things in it? It's all poured out. Hurry up." The weather here was changing rapidly. No one knew how long the rain would last. If they missed it, they would definitely regret it. Dila, Dila, Dila. The bean-sized raindrops hit the ground, splashing a lot of dust. The sky was no longer clear. It was gloomy, heavy, and scary. Soon, the raindrops became dense, like a torrential downpour, as if someone was pouring water from the sky. The children screamed and played outside with their bare bodies and bare feet. The young people who were just sitting at the door and bragging to their friends looked at the sky sluggishly, murmuring, "It's really raining." The elders who were discussing in the house, especially the old man, all had the same idea. That person actually hit the nail on the head. Could it be that that person was really a Hui? Especially the people who had persuaded Xiao Xian to stay. Now they felt regret. If they had known earlier, they would have made the other party stay, even if they had to hug his leg. Their Maka tribe also had Hui, but there were also high and low Hui. If the Hui of their tribe went to the city, they would not dare to say that they were Hui. Their ability was too low, and they would be laughed at by the witches of the city. And the person who could predict the rain 10 days ago was, of course, more powerful. If they could make him stay. At this time, Xiao Xian was already far away from the Maka tribe. The cactus around, because of the rain, the underground roots were desperately absorbing the water that finally fell. The deep groove-like folds on the stems also swelled a lot because of the absorption of water. They were like machines that stored water, storing the water, and then preparing for the next dry day. Xiao Xian, who was walking among them, wiped the water on his face, looked at the lightning and thunder in the sky, smiled softly, and moved forward step by step. Chapter 357. After leaving the Maka tribe, Xiao Xian also saw people from other tribes going out, but he did not go with them. Those people were very wary of Xiao Xian, probably because they were carrying some goods and were worried that Xiao Xian would rob them. Xiao Xian also had the experience of a long journey. He knew that the team would reject strangers halfway, so he did not go up. He just asked at a distance of 20 meters. The other party saw that Xiao Xian did not mean to get close. After reluctantly answering Xiao Xian's 2 questions, they hurried away. Xiao Xian just asked about the geographical shape of the surrounding area, but the other party's answer was too brief. Xiao Xian could only combine the information he heard from the Maka tribe and speculate about where to go. Here, there were tribes and slave masters. However, there weren't many conflicts between the tribes and the slave masters, unlike the conflicts on the other side of the sea. Many of the tribes even often went to the cities under the jurisdiction of the slave owners to trade. For them, this was a very common thing. For example, the Maka tribe often had traveling teams go to the nearest city, exchanging things for cloth, copper weapons, and so on. However, Xiao Xian did not intend to go to the slave owner's territory. What he wanted to know most now was whether the other half of the Yinjiao tribe was here or not. If the preferences of the Yinjiao people had not changed, they would probably be more inclined to the mountainous areas, especially places with many fierce beasts. With more people, there would naturally be fewer beasts and fierce beasts. Therefore, Xiao Xian intended to go to the mountainous areas with fewer people to try his luck. After asking about the surrounding geographical shape, Xiao Xian made another not divination to determine a direction and went there. He only divined the approximate location, not the distance, so he could only go in that direction. In the beginning, he could see some people traveling every 2 days, but gradually, the number of people he saw decreased. The land became desolate, and although the surrounding mountains and forests were wide, he did not know if it was because of the soil, but the growth of plants was not lush, and there were not many thick trees. Xiao Xian looked up and saw that there were layers of slightly desolate mountains around him. He did not change his route, intending to pass through the valley. He listened carefully to the movements around him. Except for the cries of some birds and small beasts, he did not hear any other dangerous sounds. The cries of the birds and beasts were relatively peaceful, and there was no panic. It should be relatively safe here. There were occasional streams flowing through the valley. Xiao Xian had been following the predetermined route and direction. When he came to a stream, he saw someone lying by the water with his head next to the stream. When the stream flowed, the other's face, his gray hair scattered in the water, swinging with the stream. If the other person had already died, Xiao Xian would not have cared. However, the person was still alive, just a little weak. After going over to check, Xiao Xian found that this was a rather old man. There were many wrinkles on his face, and he looked older than he looked from the back. The person did not have any serious external injuries. Other than the broken bone in his right arm, the rest of his body was fine. This person was dressed in gray cotton clothes, and it was unknown how much he had experienced. His clothes were tattered, and were only a little better than when Xiao Xian had first arrived. The weapons he carried were a few small copper knives. The knives looked different, but they were all very small. Judging from the shape, they did not look like they were used as hidden weapons. Xiao Xian did not know what they were used for. There was also a bag wrapped around his waist. The bag was made of animal skin. Judging from the leather, it was at the level of a dire beast. The skin of an ordinary beast would not be so tough. After carefully sizing up the person, Xiao Xian carefully turned him over and moved him away from the stream. Xiao Xian called out to him, but he did not wake up. Seeing that the person did not wake up, Xiao Xian's gaze fell on the animal skin bag around the person's waist. He reached out and poked it. When the other party was lying by the stream, his uninjured left arm had been protecting his body. Even when he flipped over, his arm did not leave his body. This was a subconscious action, which meant that the animal skin pouch was very important to this person. When Xiao Xian reached out and poked the animal skin bag, the person did not wake up, but the muscles on his face twitched. When he poked again, the person's eyes suddenly opened. His bloodshot eyes were filled with vigilance and murderous intent. He pushed his elbow against the ground and quickly rolled away from Xiao Xian. Then, he hit his head on a big rock beside him. Xiao Xian heard the sound and felt pain for him. There was no need to be so agitated. Fortunately, the person did not faint. After groaning in pain, the person wanted to reach out and touch his injured forehead. However, his right arm was injured, and his left arm was protecting the animal skin bag. He moved his left arm, but after some thought, he put it back and continued to protect the animal skin bag. He allowed the blood to flow from his forehead, but his eyes were fixed on Xiao Xian, as if he was afraid that Xiao Xian would come over and rob him. "Don't worry, I won't rob you." Xiao Xian saw him like this and said. At such an old age, he did not know why he had fainted by the stream. When he woke up, he hit his head on a rock. It would be strange if he felt good. The person relaxed a little, but his guard was still up. "If I wanted to rob you, I would have done it a long time ago. Why would I wait until now? Besides, even if I wanted to rob you now, can you stop me?" Xiao Xian said. "That's true." The white-haired old man lowered his guard a little. The murderous aura he had when he woke up also disappeared. His head was still a little dizzy, so he calmed down and moved his nose. He looked at Xiao Xian and asked, "Do you have any meat on you?" It was a question, but his tone was very certain. Xiao Xian reached into the bag and took out a piece of jerky. He threw it over and asked, "How did you faint here?" The old man hurriedly caught the jerky that Xiao Xian threw over and sniffed it. His eyes were a little disgusted, but his movements were not slow. He quickly took a few bites and answered Xiao Xian with a lisp, "I was hungry." He had thought that it was poison or some other reason, but the answer turned out to be hunger. After quickly finishing the jerky that Xiao Xian gave him, the old man looked at Xiao Xian again and asked, "Do you have any more?" Xiao Xian took out another piece, but did not immediately hand it over. Instead, he said, "Answer a few of my questions first, and I'll give you the jerky in my hand." The old man frowned and did not speak. It seemed that he was not very willing. Xiao Xian did not mind. He raised his finger and pointed, asking, "Walk that way. How long will it take to see the dense forest?" After hearing Xiao Xian's question, the old man's frown relaxed. He had thought that it was some other question, but it turned out to be this. "I don't know. I've never been there. It's my first time here. However, as far as I know, you won't see the dense forest for at least 2 days. It's all the same as here." The old man replied, "This is a famous wasteland. There isn't even a tribe here. Even if you walk for 2 more days, You won't see anyone else." After handing the jerky to the old man, Xiao went to the stream to wash his face and continued on his way. The old man was energetic after eating the jerky and could walk. Xiao did not need to be nosy anymore. However, Xiao had only taken a few steps when the old man's voice came from behind him. "Hey, wait, little brother." Just a moment ago, he had been on guard against Xiao like he was guarding against a thief. Now he was calling him little brother so intimately. Usually, when someone called someone so intimately, there must be some other intention. Xiao turned around and looked at the old man, asking him what was going on. The old man got up from the ground and looked around. His eyes stopped at one spot, and he happily pointed in that direction. "There, it's that grass with white stripes. Pick some for me." From his tone, it was as if he was ordering people around. Xiao looked at the place the old man was pointing at. It was almost vertical to the ground at a 90-degree angle. At least 30 meters above the ground, there were a few grasses that were half an arm's length with white stripes growing there. Xiao wanted to turn around and leave, but seeing that the old man did not seem to realize that his tone was wrong, Xiao thought for a moment and shook his head. Forget it. He would not argue with the old man. Besides, he also wanted to know what the grasses with white stripes were for. In such an unfamiliar place, it was always good to know more. Chapter 358. Although the mountain wall was almost perpendicular to the ground and was difficult for many people to climb, it was nothing for Xiao. After all, he had climbed this kind of mountain wall many times when he was hunting in the tribe, so he was very familiar with it. The old man stood below and watched Xiao nimbly climb up the mountain wall from below, like a gecko sticking to the wall. He seemed to be at ease and didn't seem to be strenuous at all. Seeing this, the old man couldn't help but raise his white eyebrows. He stared at Xiao's back with shining eyes. Xiao, who was climbing up the mountain wall, sensed something. He stopped and looked back, just in time to meet the old man's gaze. The old man smiled unusually amiably. He waved at Xiao and pointed at the grass on the mountain wall, saying, "Go on, go on." Xiao suppressed the doubts in his heart and continued to climb up. He reached out to grab the grass, intending to pull it down directly. "Hey, don't pull it, don't pull it. If you use it to dig it, the roots will stay longer. Use my knife to dig it. Catch." The old man took out a strange-looking copper knife from his leather bag and threw it at Xiao. So troublesome. Xiao cursed in his heart. The throw was accurate. Xiao caught the depression in the mountain wall with one hand and caught the knife with the other. He then used the knife to dig up the grass with white stripes. The knife looked strange, but it was very suitable for digging up grass that grew on a mountain wall. It didn't take long for him to dig up the grass, roots included. Catch! Xiao threw the knife and the grass down. The old man hurried over, ignoring the falling knife and carefully catching the falling grass. "What are you using this grass for?" Xiao asked as he came down from the mountain wall and saw the old man cut a leaf and put it in his mouth. "Medicine. It's useful for bone injuries." The old man didn't say much. He just kept chewing the leaf, the muscles on his face twitching. When he was almost done, he swallowed it. After tasting it for a moment, he felt that it wasn't enough, so he cut off a smaller leaf and continued chewing. Thinking of the bone injury on the old man's arm, Xiao memorized the appearance of the grass. When the old man chewed the grass, he seemed to be in pain. Xiao asked, "How does it taste?" The old man didn't say much. He cut off a small leaf and handed it to Xiao. "Try it. You can eat it even when you're not injured." "Yes. As long as you don't eat too much, you'll be fine." "All right." Xiao took the leaf. He didn't look at it carefully when he was digging earlier, but now he realized that the veins of the grass were harder than he had imagined. Especially the thickest veins with white stripes. They seemed to produce a crisp sound if he tried to break them. Xiao bit the tip of the leaf first. Feeling the cool, bitter taste, he didn't find anything wrong with his body, so he bit another half of the leaf and chewed. This time, he ate more of the veins, so the strong bitterness suppressed the cool taste. No wonder the old man's face twitched when he chewed. It was so bitter. The old man originally wanted to see Xiao Xian stomp his feet in pain, but he found that Xiao Xian just frowned and didn't have any other expression. Could it be that his sense of taste is bad? The old man thought. If so, this young man is really pitiful. He can't taste the world. Ignoring the old man's thoughts, Xiao Xian finished chewing the whole leaf. The bitter taste gradually disappeared, and the cool taste lingered. His exhaustion disappeared a lot. As for his bones, because there were no bone injuries, Xiao Xian didn't feel much. He only felt that some strength seemed to flow into his bones. Since the old man was fine, Xiao Xian planned to leave. This time, as soon as Xiao Xian moved, the old man hurriedly stopped him. Hey, wait, you want to go that way? I'll go with you. The old man stood up and carefully put the white striped grass into a cloth bag. Xiao Xian turned to look at the old man. He didn't say anything, waiting for the old man to continue. I came here to look for something. Although I don't know much about this area, I know more things than you. Don't be fooled by the fact that this place is very desolate. There are many poisonous things here. If something happens to you, I can help you. The old man said. What else? Xiao Xian asked. It's not easy for me to move. If I find something, you can help. The old man thought that this was a very good idea. Okay, that's it. However, Xiao Xian ignored him and continued to follow the route of the plan. The old man hurriedly followed and continued to persuade Xiao Xian. When the old man's saliva was almost dry, Xiao Xian asked, What are you looking for here? Looking for. The old man paused. He seemed to have some concerns and didn't want to say it. Forget it if you don't want to say it. Seeing Xiao Xian quicken his pace, the old man took a few steps forward and sighed. Have you ever heard of 1,000 gold grains? 1,000 gold grains? The word gold in the name definitely didn't refer to gold or metal. Since the old man was here, he should be looking for a plant. Since the word gold was in the name, it either referred to the color or to highlight its value. Thinking about it, Xiao Xian shook his head and said, Never heard of it. The old man looked at Xiao Xian with an ignorant expression and said, I came here to look for 1,000 gold grains. It is said that 1,000 gold grains can produce 1,000 grains per plant. It is also drought-resistant and can grow in barren land with very little rain. Food crops? So, you came here to try your luck? Xiao Xian asked. This place was indeed barren. Although there were streams and springs in the mountains, there was not much rain in this place, and it was dry. Yes, we grow food there. In the past 2 years, there's been less rain. It is said that the drought will continue for a few years. Speaking of this, the old man was very emotional. But it was useless to complain, so he came to look for these drought-resistant food crops. Aren't there witches and sorcerers? Can't they pray for rain? Xiao Xian asked again. He didn't know if the tribes here could pray for rain, so he asked this question just to test the waters. In this place, in addition to some tribal sorcerers, there were some independent professional sorcerers. Many people would pay these sorcerers to solve some problems that others couldn't solve. When the old man heard this, his face showed anger. Don't mention it, a bunch of trash. Descendants of the ancient sorcerers, you can't even pray for rain. Bah! Xiao Xian was speechless. People who dared to bah, the sorcerers, Xiao Xian had only seen one so far, and he was almost starved to death. The people of the Maka tribe absolutely did not dare to bah the sorcerers. Most of the people he had seen until now held a kind of awe for the sorcerers, except for the one next to him. If they couldn't solve the problem of rain, they could only work on crops. No matter what the old man's temper was, traveling thousands of miles to find a solution was admirable. That 1,000 gold grain, what does it look like? Xiao Xian asked. It's 1,000 gold grains. I haven't seen it with my own eyes. How can you find it if you haven't seen it? I'll be able to recognize it when I see it. The old man didn't think there was a problem at all. Right, what's your name? The old man asked. Xiao Xian, what about you? My name is Gue. The old man also wrote the words on the ground with a branch. The old man didn't ask which tribe Xiao Xian was from. He was not interested in which tribe Xiao Xian came from. Xiao Xian was about to ask again. He wanted to inquire about some things about the Yinjiao tribe from the old man, but he heard the old man suddenly say that, Xiao Xian something, take that off for me. No, I'm not your slave. Xiao Xian didn't look back. Seeing that Xiao Xian was going away, The old man realized the problem with his tone. He quickly slowed down and stepped forward to pull Xiao Xian. Do me a favor, take that off for me. Chapter 359. Xiao Xian didn't expect the old man to change his commanding tone. He was probably used to ordering people around and couldn't change it in a short time. It was already rare for him to say the word help. Seeing the old man so agitated, Xiao Xian looked in the direction he was pointing. It was another stalk of grass growing on a mountain wall. However, this stalk of grass looked very ordinary, without any patterns. Compared to the grass around Xiao Xian's feet, its leaves were slightly narrower and longer. What kind of grass is that? What's it used for? Xiao Xian asked. I don't know. Xiao Xian, why are you so agitated if you don't know? I'm agitated because I don't know. I've never seen that kind of grass before. The old man stared straight at the mountain wall and urged Xiao Xian, hurry up. Xiao Xian shook his head and didn't want to lower himself to the old man's level. However, it was only a matter of time for Xiao Xian to go up the mountain wall and pick the grass. It wasn't difficult, so Xiao Xian didn't think too much about it. Just like before, Xiao Xian used the old man's knife to dig up the grass and threw it to the old man. Other than some herbs that were often used in the tribe and some recorded plants, Xiao Xian didn't recognize many other plants. After coming here, there were even more plants that he didn't recognize. Xiao Xian didn't know what was so special about this stalk of grass and wanted to see how the old man would treat it. After carefully observing and smelling it, the old man cut off a leaf and bit the tip, tasting it carefully. Is there any smell? Xiao Xian asked. The old man shook his head. No smell. It's strange. There's not even the smell of grass. What do you think? Xiao Xian asked again. What do I think? I have a bad feeling. The old man commented. If you don't feel good, why are you still eating? Xiao Xian watched the old man eat a whole leaf. Then, the old man's face began to twitch. It wasn't the kind of twitching from the bitter taste, but from an uncontrollable twitch. His face turned a strange greenish gray. It was poisonous. Spit it out, Xiao Xian hurriedly said. He looked around, broke off a branch, and peeled off the outer skin, intending to help the old man vomit. The old man, whose face was quickly turning green, saw that Xiao Xian was about to touch his throat with the branch. He knew what Xiao Xian was going to do, so he turned his head to avoid the branch. He even reached out his arm to push Xiao Xian. And I Yuan Kai. Xiao Xian was stunned for a moment before he realized that the old man was telling him to leave because he was in the way. Fine, I'll leave then. Xiao Xian thought to himself, I'm not the one who got poisoned. Why should I be anxious? Xiao Xian thought that the old man would vomit himself or take out some hidden herbs to detoxify the poison. However, the old man's behavior surprised Xiao Xian. The old man's face was ashen, and the wrinkles on his face had deepened due to the pain. His entire face was scrunched up, and it was obvious that he was in great pain. After staggering 2 steps, the old man sat down against the mountain wall. Hey, old Jew, are you really okay? Don't you want to eat something to detoxify the poison? Xiao Xian advised. The old man didn't speak. He just waved his hand weakly and sat there motionless. He didn't speak, and his eyes were closed. If it weren't for the slight rise and fall of his chest, at first glance, one would think that he had already stopped breathing. His breath was weakening. Xiao Xian stared at the old man. Is this old man looking for death? Eating something he hasn't seen before and not vomiting after eating it. He's just holding back the poison. Isn't he looking for death? Is he tired of living? Suddenly, Xiao Xian noticed that some black veins had appeared on the old man's body. They looked like extended leaves. On his face, arms, and the parts of his body that were exposed outside his clothes, there were these black veins. Totem tattoos? A ball of fire appeared in Xiao Xian's mind. This ball of fire was the source of the old man's strength. However, the difference was that there was a vague shadow in this ball of fire. It looked like a stalk of grass or something else. It couldn't be seen clearly because it was surrounded by the fire. The blue and red flames intertwined. Not only did it not weaken, but it seemed to be burning more and more fiercely. The flames surged and expanded. Within the ball of fire, there was a faint shadow, like a weak seedling, growing and growing. Looking at the veins on the old man's body, the original black veins gradually turned into a bright green. The old man's face also began to recede. The aura of death was expelled, and in its place was an extremely strong aura of life. When the old man's face completely disappeared, the green veins also faded away. Everything returned to normal. Just by looking at the old man's current appearance, no one would have thought that the old man had just eaten a piece of poisonous grass and almost died. If Xiao Xian hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he would never have thought of it. No wonder he was so fearless. Just now, he had pushed him away with such force. It turned out that he had the ability to save his life. Xiao Xian calmed down. The old man let out a long breath and opened his eyes. He carefully looked at the seemingly inconspicuous grass in his hand that he hadn't put down. His eyes lit up. Seeing the old man carefully put away the grass, Xiao Xian asked, "Are you really okay?" "I'm fine. It's just a little poison." The old man didn't care. His casual tone showed that he really didn't care about the seemingly dangerous situation just now. Only this old man would be like this. If it were anyone else, they would have already died from the poison. Since I entered the mountain until now, I have already tasted more than 100 types of grass. There are also poisonous ones, but this one isn't the most poisonous, the old man said casually. Xiao Xian caught a glimpse of pride in the old man's eyes. He wanted to praise him, but he directly swallowed it back. He thought that Xiao Xian would be amazed. Who knew that after waiting for a while, when he looked up, the old man saw that Xiao Xian had already left. He didn't care about anything else and hurriedly chased after Xiao Xian. He was still counting on Xiao Xian to help him pick the grass. Before he met Xiao Xian, he also saw a lot of unfamiliar grass, but he couldn't pick it. He even broke an arm, so he could only give up. Now it was different. Having someone to help him pick the grass really saved him a lot of trouble. Because of the old man, Xiao Xian didn't take the shortest route. Sometimes he would climb a mountain to find some plants. The general direction didn't change, but the distance was longer. Xiao Xian followed the old man and collected some poisons and medicines. He also learned about a lot of plants. It was rare to meet someone who would listen to him. When the old man was in the mood, he would tell him about the distribution of various herbs. He had been in many places, so he knew a lot. From the old man's words, Xiao Xian not only learned about various medicinal plants, but also the distribution of some tribes and cities. Overall, this trip was worth it. The old man told Xiao Xian that he could judge what was in a direction based on some flying insects, what kind of changes were happening to the plants there. Different insects had different preferences. If he was looking for something, this could save a lot of time. Of course, in addition to these flying insects, you can also judge by some other beasts, such as the old man was about to point to a small bird and was about to say something when his ears quickly shook twice. The old man's eyes flashed. He didn't care about the bird anymore and looked in a direction. At the same time, he raised his hand to signal Xiao Xian not to make a sound. Xiao Xian looked in that direction. There was a cluster of low grass, which was the densest grass in the area. And behind the grass, there was an animal with grayish-white fur that looked very much like a mouse hiding behind it. After carefully listening to the movements around it, it stuck its head out, propped up its front body, sniffed the air, and then jumped out with a whoosh. "Quick, follow it." The old man suppressed his excitement and whispered to Xiao Xian. Chapter 360. A wild mountain rat could make the old man so excited. It probably had something to do with the 1,000 gold grains that the old man had mentioned. Xiao Xian didn't wait any longer and quickly followed the wild rat. The wild rat ran very fast, but it would stop and look around vigilantly when it stopped. If it didn't find any threat, it would continue to run. Xiao Xian could only use some short trees or tall grass as cover. The plants in this area didn't grow well, so there weren't many things that could be used as cover. It was a little difficult to follow them quietly. For Xiao Xian, even if it was difficult, he could overcome it and successfully follow the wild rat. But the old man couldn't. His hiding skills weren't as good as Xiao Xian's, so he could only follow from a distance. Fortunately, he didn't have to keep an eye on the wild rat. He just had to follow Xiao Xian. After about 20 minutes, the wild rat finally stopped. Xiao Xian stood not far away and watched the wild rat enjoy its food. He turned around and waved to the old man who was following behind him. Even if Xiao Xian didn't recognize the plant, he was sure that it wasn't the 1,000 gold grains that the old man had mentioned. It was just a 1-meter-tall shrub with some red fruits the size of a pinky nail. The wild rat's target was those red fruits. Looking at the wild rat eating the fruit until its eyes narrowed, the old man sighed. What a pity. However, the old man didn't have much hope. He knew that the 1,000 gold grains weren't easy to find, so he was mentally prepared. After the wild rat enjoyed its food, it slowly ran in another direction. It was still running, but not as fast as before. Some birds smaller than sparrows flew over in the sky and pecked at the fruits. Before the birds finished pecking, the old man quickly grabbed a handful of the fruits and threw them into his mouth one by one. There was a raised stone on the ground next to him. The old man sat there and ate the fruit while looking around the mountain. "Do you know this tree?" Xiao Xian asked. "No, it's my first time eating it," the old man said. Xiao Xian pursed his lips and reached out to pluck a few fruits from the low shrub and tossed them into his mouth. It was a little sweet, and the taste was not bad. No wonder the wild rat rushed here. When hunting in the forest, if they saw an unknown plant, even if the fruit looked tempting, the hunting warriors would not touch it unless they saw other animals eating it. Only then would they try it bit by bit, and then confirm whether it could be included in the menu. However, this old man obviously relied on his detoxification physique to eat recklessly. Xiao Xian believed that even if he hadn't seen the scene of the wild rat and the bird, the old man would still eat it. "Old Jew, why do you want to try all kinds of trees and flowers? Using your own body to test the poison?" "That's right. Whether it's poison or medicine with great benefits, we have to try it before we know. There's still many things waiting to be discovered in the future. Our clan has been experimenting countless times since our ancestors. The things that we eat and use are all obtained through taste and body testing. Daggers, baskets, beds, mattresses, pillows, tea, wine, vinegar, sugar, oil, which one of them was not experimented with by our ancestors." As he spoke, the old man's eyes showed incomparable reverence. He even stopped eating the fruit, and with infinite emotion, he said, "Our descendants will inherit the will of our ancestors and shine through the ages. Our achievements will last forever." Xiao Xian watched the old man's spittle flying, impassioned and impassioned. This old man really wanted to carry forward his ancestors' entrepreneurial spirit, pioneering spirit, and self-preservation spirit. The old man's biggest goal now was to find the 1,000 grain gold that was once mentioned in the ancestors' notes before he died. "Even if it's just a meeting, I'll be satisfied," the old man said. Since he saw the 1,000 grain gold mentioned in the ancestors' notes, the old man couldn't sleep or eat well, especially now that many places were dry and the harvest of grain crops was poor. Nowadays, not everyone was willing to go hunting. Many people with low abilities and those who advocated comfort were used to digging for food from the ground. Not many people were willing to go to the distant mountains and forests to fight with ferocious beasts. Moreover, there were not many beasts around the places where many people gathered. If they wanted to hunt, they would have to go to further places. Moreover, the dense mountains and forests had been occupied by some fierce tribes. Those people were not easy to talk to. If there was a disagreement, they would start a fight, especially those with horns. If they could find more drought-resistant grain crops, the current situation could be alleviated to a certain extent. As for the rain mentioned by Xiao Xian, there were people praying every year, but unfortunately they couldn't get it. Thinking of this, the old man was angry. Those people claimed to be the descendants of the ancient witch tribe. They collected the salary quickly, but when it came to praying for rain, they found excuses. What a bunch of useless people. After the break, the two continued to walk along the main route, only occasionally going up the mountain. 2 days later, there was still no sign of the 1,000 grain gold. In these 2 days, the old man was poisoned 4 times because he encountered strange plants. One of them even bled from the 7 orifices. It was very scary. Xiao Xian thought that the old man couldn't survive, but after a long time, the old man continued to look for the 1,000 grain gold. In this regard, Xiao Xian had a sigh at the strength of the old man's detoxification system. Most of the time, Xiao Xian listened to the old man talk, occasionally saying a few words, but most of the time he was just a listener. From the old man's words, Xiao Xian could speculate some things. For example, the old man was not from a tribe, but from a city under the jurisdiction of a slave owner. The old man himself was a slave owner. Xiao Xian was the first to see such a slave owner. His previous impression of slave owners was the group of people on the other side of the desert. Now, it was rare to meet a slave owner who was different. No, I'm going to rest for a while. You look around. The old man leaned on a branch and sat down against the mountain wall. I'm old. I can't compare to the past. Back then, don't think about the past. Go to sleep, and hurry up. Xiao Xian said. Because he was with the old man, Xiao Xian slowed down a lot. He wasn't taking the shortest route either. After walking for 2 days, he didn't feel like there were any trees around him. He wasn't sure if he'd be able to see a dense forest after 2 more days at this speed. Since he agreed to go with the old man, Xiao Xian wouldn't leave him halfway. He was not particularly in a hurry. In this barren place, Xiao Xian hadn't seen a large beast, but he did see a few human skeletons. Glancing around, Xiao Xian recalled the useful plants that the old man had introduced to him today. If he saw them in his field of vision, Xiao Xian would silently review them in his heart. As he was thinking, Xiao Xian heard running sounds. The sound wasn't loud, but listening to the sound and rhythm, it was very similar to the wild rats he had followed before. If it was just one, it wouldn't be a big deal, but Xiao Xian heard several. Could it be that this was a wild rat nest? Xiao Xian stood up and looked in the direction of the sound. Several wild rats came from different directions, running in the same direction. They didn't look like they were running for their lives, but more like the previous wild rat looking for fruit with eagerness and desire. Old Jew. Hey, wake up. There's a situation with old Jew. Xiao Xian pushed the sleeping old man. What's wrong? Because Xiao Xian was watching over him. The old man rarely fell asleep without worry. Before he could sleep enough, he was woken up by Xiao Xian, and for a moment he was a little confused. Xiao Xian was about to tell the old man about his discovery, but before he could open his mouth, the old man's ears twitched as he heard the movements around him. This was completely a professional conditioned reflex. When he heard other sounds, he directly ignored them. Only certain sounds could stimulate his nerves in the shortest amount of time. With a shiver, the old man was so excited that he didn't feel sleepy anymore. Looking around, the old man threw away the wooden stick he was using as a crutch and climbed up the mountain wall. The view here wasn't good, so he had to go to a higher place to look. But there weren't any thick trees around, and looking at the surrounding terrain, the most time-saving way was to climb the mountain wall. Hey, slow down a bit. Xiao Xian was afraid that the old man would slip and fall, so he was on guard below. If the old man got excited and fell down, he could still catch him. However, the old man was too agitated to care so much. He only wanted to climb up the ladder. Xiao Xian saw that the old man was having a hard time climbing, so he helped him. After climbing up, the old man's radar-like eyes scanned the surroundings, his ears twitching as he scanned. He was probably trying to distinguish the sounds he wanted from the surrounding noise. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.